running for Congress.
Yeah.
The next thing. Sí se puede.
Buenos días a todos. Good morning, everyone. I want to welcome all of you officially to the city of Fresno. I'm happy to be able to partner with Well and the other folks that are sponsoring this great event and much needed event so that the Latino leaders that are leading the communities in the valley that are challenged with water quality issues have the knowledge and the expertise and are connected to the experts in our local community. I've been serving on the city council now for 5 years, and the challenges that we see as a bigger city with water are not too far off from the challenges that you guys all see. But what we do have as a big city, we have the opportunity to work with smaller communities that are challenged with water quality issues. I just want to highlight one thing that we did in the last 5 years, and I actually had the pleasure of getting some advice from Gary, so I very much appreciate the support and his expertise that he has led me along the way. But when I first came into office, the first toughest vote that I had to take within 45 days was to raise the rates for our citizens, because we were going to build our first surface treatment water facility in the city of Fresno. City of Fresno is a unique city because we actually had above water rights that we weren't exercising. We were pumping a lot of our water, so we put forward this program that was called Recharge Fresno. During that time, it was very challenging because we were going to ask some of our more low-income residents to pay a little bit more for water. And so after a number of months and talking to kind of the local experts and looking at opportunities to contain some of those increases, we met with the state. We actually were told by the state, as a result of some state policy, that if we partnered with Orange School District, which is not too far from here, outside, and connected them, we would get a low interest loan to help our bigger overall project. That meant that we could build pipeline to the school that for decades has had contaminated water, which was a win-win. It was a win for the city of Fresno, and it was a win for Orange School District. What we didn't know, that when we would build a pipeline to their doorstep, even though if they connected, their water will continue to be contaminated. Why? Aging infrastructure. Huge issue here in the valley. So as we think about how we're addressing the challenges that our communities are challenged with when it comes to safe drinking water, infrastructure is huge. And we need to ask our federal officials and continue to advocate at the state level. The state level, they have done a tremendous amount of work to bring resources, in particular to rural communities. So that's why today is so important for all of us to be here, to learn about the different issues that our communities are experiencing and opportunities to collaborate to address some of these bigger issues that are really impacting the mostly low-income communities, because it is unfair that today our farm workers are having to pay double water. It is unfair. We need to change that. It is unfair that the most vulnerable communities can't open their tap and can't drink their water. So I am so just excited that there are so many new leaders, new Latino leaders in our communities that are up to the challenge, and I look forward to working with all of you, lending whatever expertise I've gained along my way to be able to help each other really address the challenges of the entire Central Valley, because there are many. And so I want to thank you guys for being here. I want to thank Gary for staying very involved with the issue of water and always being there to help us as leaders address some of those challenges, and also to Well for providing this vehicle to educate Latino leaders on the issue of water, not just for jobs, but I think fundamentally for the issue that is a human right issue, which is to have safe, affordable drinking water to every single resident that we represent. Right. Thank you, and welcome everyone here to the city of Fresno.
So next, with no introduction needed, Mayor Reyes Leon.
As Ray comes up, I forgot to mention that I'm the timekeeper. So
Yeah.
I will help Gary with the card, so please look for me, and if I raise it up, it means
he's telling the truth, okay?
Just don't show no bias, okay?
Mayor.
Pues bienvenidos a todos. Welcome everybody. I think, I mean, what else can I say? I think Councilwoman Soria said it all, right? It's an important issue, and it's a good thing that WELL has gotten involved in providing the opportunity for many of us to start learning more about water and learning about different water systems from throughout the state. It really provides us the material to be able to assess our own situation, our own communities, of which in the San Joaquin Valley, the cities are very similar, especially when it has to do with surface water, right? There's a lot of communities that are, on the most part, unincorporated, that are still getting water from underground, right? Which has its own challenges. I know in my city, our challenge is to be able to afford the upgrading of the infrastructure so that it doesn't crumble, you know, as it's been in almost on a daily basis for the past number of years, right? But what that does is that it burdens my community with a zero interest loan of millions that makes the city really make the water less accessible, because it's not really as affordable as it should be. And the human right to water is something real, right? That we gotta consider and we gotta figure it out. So, but I'm just glad that we have Senator Caballero who's working with us to try to figure out how we could, you know, take care of that huge burden on our community, so that our farm workers, who are, you know, I would say farm workers are the hardest workers on the planet, so that they could afford the water that they're gonna drink, right? So they could have access to water that, you know, you don't get the paper in the mail that says, if you drink this every day of your life for 30 years, you're gonna get cancer. You know, what's that all about? I mean, that's scary. You know, so then people go out and drive out and waste more resources to buy water that's bottled in plastic bottles, and then what happens to those plastic bottles, right? It's kind of like, how do we take care of a problem that creates other problems, right? And so it's a huge challenge, and we all know that. And I mean, I'd be remiss to not share the old quote of, I can't remember who said it, you know, whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting, right? But in my case, I say tequila's for drinking, water's for fighting. You know, and I think that's where the WOW is really important, right? The organization, because we've been able to engage with different leaders from different perspectives, and really at the end of the day, we got to come to hone into what we got to do as a society, as a species, you could say, you know, because it's about us, but it's also about just, I think, that whole ecosystem of what this region represents, to be able to maintain, sustain, conserve, and empower. You know, underground water recharge. We're working on a project right now, not the city, but there's the project next door to the city for water recharge. You know, we know that's also another challenge. We've undermined the ability to really recharge our water and really only take from it to where what has been created in millions of years, you know, is going down. And once it goes down all the way, what happens? We're done. You know, it's a scary issue, man. But it's one that demands that our leadership, our courage, and our sensibilities, and I think humility to a good extent, to come together to figure it out in a way good for all of us for the extremely long run. Pero gracias, thank you for being here. We got a good crowd. I'm glad we didn't get to council chambers, because then we would have been like, hey, where's everybody at? This is an intimately, you know, good space for all of us. But thank you once again.
By the way, Mayor, that was Mark Twain. That's but
I
like the tequila part.
Well, that was mainly
that's original. That was good. So next we have district rep for. I want to make sure we have District Representative Jacob Villagomez. Are you up next?
Yeah, I'm gonna go around.
Did I miss somebody? Okay, can we do Jacob? He's got to run out of here pretty quick, right, Jacob? So go ahead. Go ahead.
Jacob Villagomez, the District Representative for State Senator Melissa Hurtado. I want to thank you all for being here today in the Senator's District. We apologize she couldn't be here as well. She's running from Bakersfield right now, so she is everywhere, and we're just trying to keep up with her. But really want to thank you all for being here. This conversation is extremely important, as Senator Caballero knows, and all of you here really know. We have a lot of water insecurities here in the Central Valley, whether it's quality, access to quality, the infrastructure, groundwater recharge, you name it. We have all those issues, and it's important that the Valley is that voice to combat and fight for those issues, not just Sacramento telling us what to do. And thankful we have people like Senator Hurtado and Senator Caballero for their gracious work on this issue. And it doesn't stop here. We had a lot of achievements this legislative year, but conversations like this help us propel forward. So really want to thank you all for being here, and again, we apologize you couldn't be here today, but you get me. I talk about mostly water with her all the time. We're always shooting the ship on different issues with this, but really want to thank you all again, and we'll see where we go from here, but really want to take those ideas from you all and present that to the legislature, and we'll see how everything goes. So thank you all for being here again.
Thank you.
As a water manager, I can tell you that we've been working with Hurtado's office about doing a number of things and looking at a number of issues, including some clarification in the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. You folks will hear a lot about that, and you know what the law means and what it's going to require for us to do in the future. But thank you, Jacob, for that discussion. So I didn't mean to skip over you, Supervisor Rodrigo Espinosa.
Thank you very much, everyone. Before
3 minutes.
I want to acknowledge Councilmember from Livingston, Juan Aguilar Jr. Thank you. Please, everybody. Before I start, I want to thank, well, you know, that's why we're here, and that's why I'm here, and also thank Senator Ana Caldera for agreeing to host this workshop for all, the education of all of us. Okay? So I just say, I want to start by saying that I'm an immigrant. I came from Mexico when I was 10, and I grew up in Delhi, and then we have the Merced River. I'm a farmer as well too, so learning from water, I grew up with, you know, picking grapes and everything, and peaches, everything. My dad was a little contractor, so I grew up just working hard in the fields, and in 2002 I was pushed to run for city council. But in the Merced River is the cutoff for the Merced Basin. The Merced Basin is in extreme water shortage. North of the Merced River, we have Stanislaus, part of North Merced County and Stanislaus County, which is the Cholac Sub-Basin, which is got good water. Why? Because we have Lake Don Pedro that feeds the water system for the Cholac Irrigation District, and they have 2 million acre-feet. The south part is Merced Sub-Basin, is fed by Lake McClure, which is 1 million acre-feet. So you see the difference. So during the drought that we went through, so Lake McClure went dry, you know, a lot sooner. So everybody was sucking more groundwater out of the ground, and that's why we're in this situation. And of course, the more south you go, the less water we have. North of the river, we have 2 million acre-feet. So all my ranches with the family were north of that river, so we were fortunate to have more canal water. On the south part, the canal water was stopped, and so that's why more people was you know, pumping more water out of the ground. So you got the situation, and then of course the groundwater levels go down, and you got less quality issues in all the district. Domestic wells went dry, and you know, a lot more citizens with domestic wells they went dry, and then of course, you know, fortunate now that I'm on the committee with LAFCO for the county, and so we were able to help. The county got state funds to send you know, portable tanks, and the county used to bring water to the communities or for people who are affected with, you know, the wells right now. So I just want to say that, like I said, learn about water, going to the well. It was a 6 months course. The well edition, it's just amazing. Meeting all these elected officials from Southern California, Northern California, to agree on water. Because water we have to share. You know, we went to the Delta and all throughout Southern California as well, the LA River, and so Victor was instrumental in showing us, you know, with the Weller Group, that we have to work together as electeds. Up and down the valley, I'm fortunate to be a supervisor. 3 years ago, I'm running for re-election now. So 14 years on the city council. You know, we also went through a recall in 2010 where I became mayor, and water was the issue. And so water is going to be the biggest issue in the valley, and I just want the electeds to be educated as much as you can. Okay? Any questions? I got more. I'm on 2 GSAs also as well for the county, on the Merced Chila GSA and also on the Turlock West GSA. So if you get any information, I got plenty of information I can send you guys, and you can get educated more about water. So Thank you very much for coming, and thank you well.
By the way, he touched on something that was very important. I'll just say this very quickly, the delta. Okay. Even though we live inland, we gotta understand that there's a connection to that delta, and so we need to get ourselves educated in terms of what that means to our Central Valley. Okay, the next one is a senator. Senator, could you make your way out? Senator I've worked with her before, and she's been very receptive to meeting with us and passing legislation. She is a champion for the Central Valley. So.
Thank you. Well, thank you for that great introduction, because I'm going to take more than my 3 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever it is you just said.
Take it on with Victor.
Let me first of all thank WELL for their commitment to putting on these kinds of informational seminars and summits. And it is critically important to our communities that we understand water and that we understand where it comes from and how we can work to make sure that our community has the water it needs, not only to build economically, but to make sure that we have potable drinking water for our residents. And so it's critically important. Thank you very much to WELL. To my partners in crime, Rodrigo and Ray Leon, for putting this together. It was their brainchild, and they said, let's do it, and thank you. I really appreciate it. To Councilmember Soria for opening up City Hall. It's really terrific. It's great when we can all work together and be partners. Along the line, you know, there are three basic ways that we get water. One is through the Delta, and not everybody in California gets water through the Delta, but that Delta is one earthquake away from disaster. And it's important that we understand what that means, particularly since we're overdue for an earthquake along the San Andreas Fault, and we've started to have some movements, and so it starts you wondering, okay, what's next? It's rain and snow melt, and that's critically important with climate change. We're seeing less coming during the period of time, and these droughts that make it, that really exacerbate the issue. And then groundwater, and you're going to hear a lot about groundwater because we've been over pumping during the drought years, and there are new rules in place that tell us how we can take water, and if we take it, how we have to replace it, and that's going to have a tremendous impact. And to this valley, it is estimated that between 500 acres to 1 million acres will have to be put out of production in order to be able to meet the requirements. So just think about what that would mean to your community to have 1 million acres out of production. And think about the impact that that has on the quality of life that people have. During the drought, when people weren't working, it had a terrible impact. We knew it was going to end, but if you're taking 1 million acres out, you don't get it back easily. And so that's why it's important that we all understand that as Latino leaders, we have to have a seat at the table. And that means understanding how water works, how we have to cooperate and work out agreements that may be different and difficult to do. And I think the drought really taught us that if we don't come to the table and if we don't have information and if we don't have resources to put in together, we're going to be left out. That's just the bottom line. When I was in the assembly, the first drought that came around, well, it's the first drought that, I mean, there's been a million droughts, right? But in recent history, in 7, 8, and 9, Governor Schwarzenegger, then Governor Schwarzenegger, wanted to work on water. And when I got to the legislature, our speaker said, we're not doing any water work. We're not going to engage. We're not going to do work. We're not going to propose any solutions. And there were 3 of us that went to the Latino caucus of the legislature. It was myself, Assemblymember Arambula, Juan Arambula, and Mary Salas, all representing rural California. And we said, we absolutely need to understand this issue. We all sat on Water Parks and Wildlife. We need to understand this issue because our communities are at risk. And so we started driving the discussion in the Latino caucus so that we had a voice to be able to go to the speaker and say, I know you said we're not going to do this, but we have to. And so we're elected by for the Latino Caucus, but for the Latino Water Coalition, and but for the fact that there were those of us from rural California that said we need a seat at the table, and we absolutely have to be included in the discussions. We wouldn't have gotten there, and so you won't see that written anywhere in history. And I tell you that story because we always get left out of history, but we have to be there anyway, because it's important to our communities that we get the resources to them that are critically important. And so today is really important. It really is critical that we get as much information as possible so that we can start impacting. There were 5 bills that were passed back in 2009, and the question is, what's happened in that interim, and what is the direction that the state is going? What are we doing to protect the Delta? What are we doing to make sure that there's the ability to continue to take water from the Delta and to use it responsibly? What are we doing for conservation? What are we doing for recycling? Because there was significant money for recycling. We got to get people off of septics. We got to start hooking ourselves up to wastewater treatment facilities. We got to start cleaning that water. We've got to teach it conservation. Don't leave that shower running, and those half-an-hour teenage showers. Those are the kinds of things we got to take back to our communities because it's critically important. And the ability to turn on that water faucet and to get potable water is critical. And so there's money for that this year. That was really important work that was done. I'm proud of the fact that it didn't result in a tax because we've never taxed the necessities of life. We don't tax medical expenses, we don't tax food, we shouldn't tax water. But now we've got a water source, and it's continuing, and it's going to give us the ability to start going in and cleaning up some of those systems that really need the improvements. And so thank you for being here. Your participation is really important here today, and I'm really honored to be here with you. And so thank you very much for the opportunity.
Perfect timing, perfect timing.
The senator's really modest. I've been in the water business for over 34 years. And those bills, that bond, it took a lot of work, it took a lot of effort, and it took leadership. And she provided leadership. Juan Arambula, we worked with him diligently to try to get that bond pushed through. In fact, Juan marched right next to me when we marched up the San Luis Reservoir, and you were there too as well too. You marched as well too. He pulled over and parked. He said, "You walking?" Yeah. He got off and he started walking. He was supposed to be speaking. He was like 15 minutes late. Everybody was wondering, where'd he go? Where's he at? And he was with us taking that march up there because it meant that much to him. Yeah. So, okay, I'll stop there. So now we get into our speakers, okay? And so our first speaker this morning is Dan Monk, and he's with the UC Cooperative Extension in Fresno County. He wants to talk a little bit about irrigation and the impacts and the benefits of it. So, Dan, great one. Thank you.
So in case you forget who I am, there we go right there.
Hey Dan, can you hold on real quick? Let's hold on to our questions. We got 10 minutes at the tail end to ask questions, so let him go ahead and get through his presentation, try to keep everybody on time, and then if you got questions, please provide them at that time.
I'm told I have about 30 minutes total. Is that about right?
No. That includes the questions.
3 minutes, we don't need slides.
You got about 20 minutes.
Well, that includes questions? Okay.
No, 30 minutes includes questions. 10 minutes at the end for questions.
That's what I was told, so I'm glad we're doing that. And good morning, everybody. It's really nice to see a vibrant group here this morning on Saturday, taking a Saturday morning out
Water is important for us.
to learn something. Water is important for us. It's extremely important in the valley here. And today I'd like to try, it's a big issue. It's such a big issue. I think you understand that. I'm going to try to provide just a little bit of context from a water quality perspective. My colleague Daniele Zachariah is going to speak after me. He's going to do a little more of the focus on the water supply side. Just it's great to be here. Thank you very much. I don't share everything with you guys, but I think you guys and I we have a lot in common here. I don't speak a second language. I just speak English. That's it. but I do speak, things, are you familiar with cumbia? I can do a good cumbia, I can do a decent cumbia. And I actually have somebody told me, not too long ago, I had a beautiful bachata. So I do understand the Latino community. I've worked with the Latinos for a long time, and we have people in Cooperative Extension from all walks of life coming in and asking questions. We have a small farms advisor, for instance, that works a lot with the Southeast Asian community, and she's done a wonderful job of sort of connecting the Southeast Asians with better irrigation, nutrient management. I'm a farm advisor, right? So as a Cooperative Extension farm advisor in Fresno County, I do things like irrigation and soil management research. Worked on the west side, for instance, quite a bit. Spent a lot of time out in the Huron area. I heard Huron a little bit earlier today, but worked over in a lot of my career in cotton issues. And
Oops, sorry about that.
am I doing that or?
No, I think it might be me. Go ahead.
Very good. I've done, over the years, I've done some cotton tillage research, cotton production, and more recently, I've been doing a lot of work as cotton acreage has declined. I've been able to free up some of my time as my appointments, irrigation, soils, and cotton. I've been able to free up some of my time on some of the policy issues. So, for instance, I was on the State Water Board asked me to be on basically an expert panel to provide input to answer basically 14 questions that the Water Board had on how we might organize a regulatory program related to nitrate contamination, and how do we get farmers to reduce nitrates and inputs from agricultural systems to groundwater systems, because that's one of the issues, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. I'm going to talk just a little bit on touch a little bit on sort of general water resources, and then I'll try to spend the bulk of my time in water quality basics and some of the regulation that goes along with that as well. So we'll be talking about the board a little bit. But I always find this kind of an interesting sort of global picture of what's happening, and to appreciate some of our water resources. Most all of the water we have in this entire world is in the ocean, and less than 1% of it is in the atmosphere, is in the glaciers, is in our aquifers. We see our Sierra Nevada mountains, and we see a tremendous a bounty when we go down and visit the river of how much water we actually have, but in terms of the global comparison, it's really kind of a small number, isn't it? And in fact, California in particular has sort of an interesting issue, because most of the water falls in this little green area here, up in the northern part of the state, and there's very little rainfall and precipitation that occurs in other parts of the state, but that's where we have water users, isn't it? We have water users in the San Joaquin Valley, largely agriculture, but we have a lot of people here too, and it's a growing community that we have. We have a lot of municipal water users in the Bay Area, and boy, Southern California, right? Between yards and everything that they need to keep things functioning, we've got huge, and so what this creates is this disparity in water in certain areas, but less water in other areas. And so what California has done over the years is they created a wonderful canal system, a wonderful irrigation system, from the Frying Kern Canal to State Water Project to Federal Water Projects. We have canals, and you guys have a wonderful resource that you have. You have an advisor, and you have a leader in Gary Serrato who understands the issues, has spent a career understanding not just water supply, not just how to get water to the farm, but also how to get understands the water quality issues that are a part of this state as well. We have to deal. Over the years since I've been on board, I came on board in 1990 with Cooperative Extension. We've had some big changes in how we distribute water in this state. How many of you are familiar with CVPIA? Do you know what that legislation was? I'm not going to. There's just a couple. I would suggest that this would be a great another topic for you to kind of begin to appreciate what's happened in this state and how things have changed in recent years. With water quality, environmental flows, things like this, that's changed since in recent history. That's also made a big impact on our water supply, but also water supply affects water quality. It affects soil quality. It affects our ability to farm, for instance. And then we've got the global situation where we have experienced climate change. I think most of you are at least of the age that you've seen changes in how much fog we have in the valley here, for instance. I know I've seen that change since I moved down to the area in 1986. And we see very big differences in our summer temperatures and all, which make a big impact on water use, but also how we grow and what we grow in the San Joaquin Valley here. So water supply issues are, my point here is the water supply issues really are integrated into the water quality issues as well. Both water quality and supply are products of environmental conditions. And as I pointed out, we've got a very different environmental condition in the north of California than we do in the south of California. So what is water quality? So basically, it can be sort of a Webster's definition. It's chemical, biological, physical, and sometimes radiological characteristics of the water. So when we're talking about chemical, we're talking about things like salts. We're talking about things like sodium and potassium, etc. We're talking about bicarbonate, sulfates. These are common constituents. Some of these are actually nutrients, aren't they? They're important nutrients for our body. If we didn't have good drinking water systems, we wouldn't be getting these important nutrients to our body. Some of them, on the other hand, can be actually a little bit toxic. While selenium, for instance, is a nutrient, it's a required nutrient for the human body, in too much quantity, it can be a toxic as well, right? Remember Kesterson Reservoir. And that's another sort of different water quality issue, but something that I think you should all at least be a little bit aware of in terms of the environmental issues that occurred there back in the late 70s and really into the 80s. And so we have trace elements in our water that, again, are important to human health. Now, this is, in terms of water quality, this is something you should be familiar with. This is something that you should all receive if you live in a city, is a water quality report every year. And basically this gives you an idea of what some of the contaminants are, what's happening in your own water system. Obviously, this isn't something you're going to have if you're alone on a farm and you don't have a municipality, but it is something that's required and something that you can appreciate things like the term up here. We can't really see it very well, but I just want to make sure that you understand the term MCL, which is maximum contaminant level. And what is that? Well, it's the level that's established, the concentration level that's established in for each criteria on the water. There's like 100 different constituents that they monitor for, but there's a number of them that if they exceed that maximum contaminant level, you are out of compliance, basically, with the Clean Water Act. Okay, and that's a federal act that's there to protect us. We also have Porter-Cologne Act in the state of California that's there to protect us so that we're assured good water quality. And if we're not achieving that MCL, or if there's continued exceedances in the MCL, the maximum contaminant level, there's a serious problem. We've actually had well shutdowns, for instance. I'm in the city of Reedley. We've had well shutdowns because of, in the 1990s, because of high DVCP levels. DVCP was basically a fumigant that was used in the late 70s and throughout the early 80s, until they found that this stuff moves, and it moves fast, and it was used for viticulture. It was used for some of the tree crops to basically combat and control nematodes. We have other methods that we control nematodes today, but we didn't know back then. Shell didn't know back then, or maybe we don't know, that material actually moves pretty good inside, and it gets in the water, and it is a carcinogen. And we do have levels that are established. Generally, they're very conservative, and those levels basically are set. But we've had exceedances and therefore well shutdowns. We've also had some well shutdowns in Reedley as a result of high nitrates. Common salts and contaminants introduced through human activities. It's important to bring up some of the biologicals. So we do see, periodically, we'll see high E. coli or coliform levels. Generally, in the municipal water systems, these are controlled. They're controlled by the introduction of They're generally not ozone, but that can be a way to clean that up. But basically, we often chlorinate our water. Place a high chlorine is a chlorine gas, or chlorine is a strong oxidizer. So it'll actually strip all kill biological activity in the water. And that's why we introduce chlorine at a very low rate to many of our systems. I've already mentioned these. Just a note that radium is, it irradiates. It's something that over a period of time at a large enough concentration, it can increase your chance to have cancers, they have found. Okay? It doesn't mean you're going to get cancer. It just means that if you're exceeding the MCL, that you can, in fact, increase your chance to get cancer. Nitrate issues, again, are widespread. They're common MCL violations. And here's some work that's done by one of our groundwater specialists up at the Davis campus. Thomas Harder's group organized this. This basically just tells us where some of these exceedances are. This is the number of wells, or the percentage of wells that have a nitrate exceedance that's greater than 10 milligrams per liter, 10 parts per million. And basically you can see up in this area here, the red indicates that there's 61 to 80% of those wells are in exceedance, and there's only a few areas where there's 0% of the wells that are in exceedance. So nitrate's a very common material. It's a very important material for agriculture, right? It's like the #1 material that a grower will use to increase yields, and but it also moves. Nitrate is a negative anion, and so it moves rapidly with water. So it's easy to get into the water table, okay? And there's actually a lot of question. There's still a lot of debate on health effects, but the one health effect is methemoglobinemia. And don't ask me to pronounce that twice, and I know I didn't pronounce it right the first time. But basically, it's called blue baby syndrome. And so if high nitrate water is ingested by a pregnant mother, basically her blood system cannot process it. It basically binds oxygen, and it can actually starve the fetus from oxygen, and therefore the baby turns blue. We call it blue baby syndrome. We're not aware of any deaths that have occurred by this, but it is certainly a health concern and a health issue for us in California, and bringing attention to the nitrate MCL issue is connected with basically public health. Also, some of our groundwater scientists have been able to tell us where these nitrates are coming from. And in this map, we're basically showing how much of this, what percentage of the wells here in this area, in the Merced to Stanislaus area and the Fresno to Tulare, what percentage of that nitrate that's in the groundwater came from manure? How much of it came from a septic system? How much of it came from a fertilizer? And how much of it came from natural sources? So we can actually go out and there's specific, really technical measurements that you can make to understand the background of where that nitrate came from. Nitrate has certain characteristics to it that will allow us to make these assessments as to where that nitrate came from. And as you can see here, as you might expect, in some of the heavy dairy, concentrated areas in Kings and Tulare County, manure stands out as an important source in many of these areas. But there's also other areas that you see a lot of influence by septic systems, and other areas where fertilizer and nitrogen is an important or a key component to that. So how is water regulated, and what is the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program? Have you heard of the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program? Has anybody? Okay, just a couple. Then I'm glad I raised it. I'm not going to get into all of the detail of it, but basically, it's established by the Central Valley Water Board, who has a mission to protect the quality of the region's water for beneficial uses. Region 5 is basically the Central Valley region. It's the largest region, and it's about 40% of the state's area, and about 20% of the state's population, but about 2/3 of the drinking water comes out of this area. The state board, on the other hand, kind of oversees what's happening in the regions. So I just want to give you an idea. There's basically two boards, and sometimes they don't agree on everything, but they do work together. The state board kind of has to oversee what the regional boards are doing. So there is that regulatory layer, and they basically are in charge of basically establishing waste discharge requirements and permits for everything from municipal uses, which might be a sewage water treatment plant. If you're discharging into a groundwater, or if you're discharging into a surface water, they control what's called a point source there. On the other hand, if we look at irrigated agriculture and how much they're basically, in a sense, they're discharging as well, because water moves onto their property, but then it moves off of their property, right? So water moves on through irrigation, and then oftentimes it moves into the groundwater because of over-irrigation. You need to leach salts. And so what happens is you get water moving from the farm fields and into the local groundwater system. So where where the grower in the past, let's see, trying to advance that forward, did I? Can you help me advance that? I'm not sure, but it's not, doesn't seem to be. So these are there's basically 9 general waste discharge requirements. There's also, I wanted to introduce the idea of coalitions, which is kind of a new part of the ILRP, or the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program. These coalitions help growers, basically growers sign up. This is a new thing. Growers sign up with the coalitions. The coalitions have to report to the board. Basically, this irrigated land regulatory program addresses existing and potential impacts to surface and groundwater quality related to agriculture. Right? Minimum discharge weight discharge. Its goals are to have minimum waste discharge requirements from irrigated lands, and the idea here is to maintain high water quality. There, we got it advancing. Okay, thank you. So the conditional waiver from 2003 to 2012 allowed growers basically time to sort of organize what happens with water quality on their farms. But as of 2013, the order was adopted where they now have to actually report. And I'm basically going to jump through this a little bit. There's a timeline for improving basically wastewater discharge requirements. And this is just kind of a map of kind of what happens, a cartoon of what happens in the soils. But the idea here is that because we do use nitrate in irrigated agriculture, that there's the potential for leaching here, and we're trying to minimize this. We're trying to minimize the degradation of the water table by limiting the amount of water that basically goes below the root zone and goes into the groundwater system. I'm going to jump through this, but basically just to talk a little bit about what are some of the new requirements. Now all growers, doesn't matter in every field, they basically now have to set up and establish a worksheet and a plan for how much nitrogen they're going to be using. So now growers today are much more regulated than they have been in the past. They basically need a certificate, they need certification, and they can also have a professional come in and certify their land, but they have to have a plan certified now for the use of nitrogen on their farms. So growers are much more regulated today. They take their NMP, they submit it to the coalition to evaluate how much nitrogen they're applying, and there's feedback from the coalition that basically if they're applying very high rates, the coalition can help with education. University of California can help with education and try to sort out why such high rates are being applied. This also goes into summary reports from the coalition to the water board, and now the water board, has the flexibility to actually increase regulation if they see that's fit going forward in the future. So this is new regulation. I think it's important for you guys to recognize that California agriculture is continuing they're ramping up a lot of the regulation. And growers they need to be educated now, and they are being. So The days of this type of irrigation are very limited, and you very rarely see this type of application, but it is an important thing. The last thing I want to sort of touch on before I take some questions is I would like to talk just a little bit about salinity, because I think not only is nitrate sort of a ubiquitous thing, I mean, we know that there's exceedances in groundwater, but salinity is also a big issue for the valley. There isn't a lot of drainage, particularly in the Tulare Basin. There's not a lot of drainage of water to the delta. And so what that means is all of the salts that are here, basically they just multiply over time. If we import water, for instance, there's salts in that water. And I wanted to give you an appreciation that different parts of the valley have different qualities. If you're in the glorious Fresno Irrigation District, for instance, the water quality that comes right out of the Sierra Nevada mountains is actually very, very high quality water, low TDS water, that means low salinity. But if you're farming on the west side, where there's, those are old seafloor sediments, the water quality there and the well water that you bring up from the subsurface actually has a lot of salts in it. So that does limit. And what happens in the process of irrigated agriculture is, what do? We concentrate that water, don't we? Because the plants take up the water and the salts, or they basically take it up into they accumulate that water in their root systems. But when they evapotranspire, they transpire that water, they're only moving water, and they take very little salt away. So if you're continuously bringing up water from the well that's below your feet there, and you're basically bringing up salts and depositing them on the soil surface. And the main way that you manage those salts is through leaching. That means applying more water than is actually needed. And that's just a natural fact of irrigated agriculture. It happens on the east side, it happens on the west side. We just see it more commonly, and you're going to see those effects of salts on the plants more commonly where you have high TDS waters, whether it's well water, whether it's imported water. That's the nature of agriculture, and you need to manage those salts. So that's a part of what we deal with in drinking water supplies as well. So the gentleman in Huron that's trying to improve water quality out there has a certain, there's certain well water quality out there, and if they're above the Corcoran clay, 2,000 to 3,000 parts per million isn't going to hack it. That's exceeding an MCL. Okay. Whereas if you're below the Corcoran clay, which you might be drilling a well down to 600, 700, 800 feet, 1,000 feet to get that higher quality water. Now you can use that water for a municipal system, but that's the same water the grower's going after, because the grower, if you're trying to have a business that succeeds, you want to be working with lower quality waters. So the last fact I have here is if you have an EC of 1, which is about 640 TDS, or parts per million, if you have an EC of 1, which is fairly low, fairly high water quality, and you apply 1 acre feet, and usually on a lot of our farms we're applying 3 to 4 acre feet, depends on the crop, but you're going to be depositing about 1,740 pounds of salt just for that 1 acre foot. So multiply that by 3 or 4 if you're working with almonds, by 3 if you're growing table grapes, and now you get an idea of how much salt accumulates just from everyday irrigation and what kind of salt you have to manage. And how many of you think we can get out of this problem by using reverse osmosis or by treating that water? Because there is a process, but the issue is if we try to treat that water through reverse osmosis, we're still producing a salt, aren't we? So we might be producing a fresh water, but we're also producing a salt, and we've got to do something with that salt. The other problem with this kind of a solution is it's very expensive and it's very energy intensive, and that's why we don't just start up reverse osmosis processing in our municipalities just so we can get around in a water quality problem.
Sorry, Gary, we're 5 over, just so you.
Oh, okay.
And with that, you guys might appreciate this. We got all our water up in Northern California. We got a lot of people down in Southern California, and in between, sometimes it feels like, Who cares, right? It is a problem with politics and policy of the state, and, going back to that CVPIA, I'm sure Gary appreciates that, especially that, you know, we have had a changing water situation in California, in Central California in particular, and we have a lot less water to work with than we did in the past. And so with that,
We got only 5 minutes left here, so we can stay on schedule here. So there was a lot of high-level stuff up here, okay? So you had to get your chemistry on, you had to get a lot of things on and to really understand it. But those are all vital issues that we need to get educated on. So, any questions?
Some question. In regards to your report right here, is it accessible for all the permits and all you must have to be a scientist to understand that, so I just wanted to see, is it available?
So you're talking about the water quality report that the city...
Everything that you presented right now,
Okay.
on the screen.
My presentation, I can make that available if anybody would like to have a copy of this.
I would.
That's the whole presentation right there,
Yes.
so I'd be happy to lend that to you and.
Did you bring cards with you?
You know, I didn't, but I'm gonna go back to my, can we go back to my first slide, because I've got my.
Why don't we do this while you're doing that? Any other questions?
Right here, what's the MCL based on?
It's really supposed to be, and it is, it's based on science. So EPA, and basically establishes for each material, and it can be a wide range of chemicals, determines what the health hazard is. And then basically and there's animal laboratories, you know, there's a whole process of evaluating these. So anytime a pesticide, for instance, goes up for registration, they evaluate toxicity.
Hey, Dan, I think the bigger question was, who develops the MCLs?
Yeah.
No, well, this is really just get to the point of my question my inquiry is, you know, usually the standards are based on a healthy, middle income, white male. You know, in a lot of our communities, we have children that are already dealing with, say, asthma or other debilitating illnesses, where that standard would not apply correctly, and it's actually more dangerous. You know what I mean? And so I mean, it's just kind of.
So your question's a very good question. I'm just going to remind you that you're talking to a farm advisor. Okay, I'm not a health expert.
You got
okay?
it, Dan. You got
it. But you know, the standards are established on larger. They use animal studies in some cases. In other cases, they're using studies from areas that have been contaminated, and they're looking at the effects on human populations.
Yeah.
But basically, they're established by federal, and then oftentimes California has even more stringent standards, and they'll change that MCL if they feel like the federal standard isn't high enough. So these are health
California
trained
EPA
people.
and federal EPA.
You know, before there was no MCL limit on TCP, now everybody's got TCP, and the cities don't have money, the counties don't have money, but yet they set a very low standard, and so now in your reporting standards, cities have to report out to the citizens. So every election, I was like, I thought you fixed the water, you haven't fixed the water. So it's an issue everywhere.
Right. You know, I'm not a guy that really talks about litigation, but I know there's been litigation efforts that have happened with the city of Fresno, Clovis, you know, here locally, and they've gotten money to help address that issue.
We got $13 million in 2009. City of Atwater, the mayor's right here. They got 43 minutes, but it's not enough because we got so many wells.
Oh, you know, absolutely, I totally agree with you. Okay, we're gonna wrap that up. By the way, thank you. I noticed there've been some other people that walked in, you know, here. So if you just got here a little recently before we did introductions, can you just tell us who you are?
Mayor Alma Beltran from Parlier.
Mayor, City of Atwater.
Okay, your name?
Paul Creighton.
Paul Creighton, thank you, Paul. Okay.
Go.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Brian Soares, Councilmember, City of Delano.
City of Delano, okay, good. Nice. Where are you studying? Oh, yes. Okay, good. All right, you got some others. Okay, next one, next speaker that we're gonna have, I'm gonna welcome him up. Yeah.
Gary, one more introduction.
I'm sorry.
One more introduction.
Oh, I'm sorry.
One more introduction.
Oh.
Hi, Laura, I'm with the City of Fresno, I work for Councilor Miguel Arias.
Oh, very good.
Welcome, please have a seat.
Okay. Our next speaker is Dr. Daniel Zakari. Zakari, okay, thank you. He's with UC Davis Department of Land, Air, and Water Resources, and he's going to talk about ag and water demand. So, Dr.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that I searched last night the definition of Latino, and it happens that I'm a Latino. I was born and raised in Italy, so I'm part of Italy. So I'm happy to be here. So I'm a specialist in water management. Buongiorno. So I do a lot of work in research and policy and extension education. So I'm happy to be here. I feel like home. What I was asked to give is an overview of the bigger picture of agricultural water management in California, with some focus on the Central Valley and the San Joaquin Valley. So that's what I'll do. As you can see, my full name is Daniel, but when I communicate by email, I drop the last E, because otherwise people expect a French blonde lady and always some disappointment, you know. All right, okay. So what I was planning to cover in this 20 minutes, usually I provide this story about California water in 2 hours. So what I'll wrap up is like the main fact about California water. And I'll provide some background information on California ag and water, with focus on Central Valley and San Joaquin Valley. There's the dynamic of water supply and water demand, although Dan has already covered that partially. And the long-term trends of water-related challenges that we're seeing, and I'll try to make time to point what we expect in the near future. Again, I'm an extension specialist, so I spend a lot of time in the field and talking with people and with the water agencies in Sacramento. So this is a few facts about the California agriculture. We're taken from the CDFA report. You see the 2018 report. This relates to the crop season 2017. So the new report, the one related to the crop season 2018, is still yet to come. So in 2017, California agriculture consisted of 77,000 farms, all in all generating about $50.3 billion. So this is a huge number, but it counts very little with respect to the GDP, so less than 2%. But it's growing, it keeps growing in terms of numbers. The percentage, how much agriculture counts on the GDP, it goes decreasing because there are other sectors that grows faster and probably more profitable. 25.3 million acres of agricultural land, not all of it is used, but we got 14 million acres of pasture and rangeland. Those are rain-fed, so that means they don't need irrigation, and 9.5 irrigated cropland, out of which 6.3 are annual crop, and 3.2 million acres are orchards and vineyards. I'll show you how this percentage are changing over time. All in all, huge industry, almost 400 crops, and here's a few records. California is #1 food and agricultural producer in the U.S. Has been so for more than 50 years. 50% of the U.S. fruits and nuts and vegetables is produced in California, so it counts at the national level very much. And also is still the #1 dairy state in the U.S. We'll see how things will shape up in the near future. Here's the different sectors, let's say commodity groups, and the income that is generated all in all, how it is broken down. As you can see, the first industry is fruit and nut crops, almost 41% of the gross cash income, and then livestock, poultry, vegetable, field, floriculture, and other. So all in all, again, we are in 2017, at the end of 2017, $50.3 billion. All right, so out of the 10 top counties in agricultural generation, generating agricultural revenue, 7 are in the San Joaquin Valley. 7 of the top 10, and they all produce, those 7 counties, about 60% of the total California agriculture. So California is a huge California agriculture is a huge industry, and San Joaquin Valley is 60% of that huge industry. All right. So here's a few facts about water. Those numbers were taken from the Department of Water Resources, the last water plan, and they somehow refer to an average year, and 2010 was an average year. So the total water supply generated in average is an average is about 200 million acre feet per year. As you can see, out of that, the big chunk goes to the environment. Agriculture takes a little less than the environment, all right? Urban water use take about less than 10%. There's a large room here for recycling, and there's a room that is unexplored. That is also expensive, so we're waiting until more viable, economically viable solutions come out. So the total beneficial water use, that means the total amount of water that generates a product or a service in California is about 80, on average, is about 80 million acre feet per year. Right? How this water is broken down. So you can see 49% of this 80 on average goes to the environment. 41%, so a little less in the environment, goes in agriculture, and less than 10% goes to urban water use. All right. So how is it? This is a graph of California water use by region and sector. As you can see, we got light green is the environmental. I think is somehow brown, the agriculture, and light brown is the urban. As you can see, the Central Valley was divided in three hydrologic regions. So Sacramento River, San Joaquin River, and Tulare Lake. Here's what you somehow get on average. This is a long-term average, okay, but it's changing. And here is during normal year, I would say wet year, this is the breakdown, and this is during the dry year. I'll leave the presentation, so I got so many slides here, and I'll try to navigate them, but I'll leave everything with you so you have all these numbers, right? Dan has already talked about the water supply and water demand dynamic. Just to give you some more information, there's about 40% of the area, what you see colored in green and let's say dark blue, 40% of the area across California that generates 90% of the water resources. But the demand, most of the demand is in this red area. So the red, the light green, and orange represent 60% of the area of California and generate only 10% of the resources. And this includes the import from the Colorado River Basin, okay? So that means the water needs to be moved in space from north to south and in time, from winter and fall and winter to spring and summer.
We gotta raise the rates.
Yeah.
Easy.
And that happens through a very articulated water system that includes reservoir. I mean, the Sierra Nevada, first of all, then snowmelt goes into surface reservoir, and then it is conveyed through aqueducts, but also the aquifer represents as storage and then like a diffuse network for distribution. All right. There are a few capital areas that are disconnected from the grid. So this is the central coast, the southern coast of the Colorado, let's say the low desert, and up where there's water import in these two areas, and there's much reliance on groundwater. And this two central coast and south coast, they are basically disconnected from the rest of the water system. All right. Okay, so what it really matters in California in terms of water supply is what is accumulated on the Sierra. Because the snowpack is what is basically represent most of the water storage for California. I put here the average, long-term average accumulation of precipitation during the last 70 years. And you can see here, there's a green area that represents the average. And you can see during the drought where we were, and last year where we were. So there's a huge fluctuation, 3 times. So year after year, we can get you know, below the average, above the average, or you can get close to the average. So there's a big fluctuation. So this is part of the climate. So when I started in University of California in 2013, I jumped into the middle of the drought and I said, oh, it's an emergency, it's an emergency. Then I started looking at the data. It happens on a cyclic mode. And so this is part of our climate. So you got flooding, wet year, very short water supply, and the following year. So we have to live with the fluctuation, the big fluctuation. And this is an example of the Northern Sierra. This is the Central Sierra. Is basically the same. You got 3 times as much from one year to the other. What do we do with that excess water? It's another issue. And this is the Southern Sierra Nevada. But again, the Sierras are the main water storage. And then there's a groundwater that represents, the California bathtub. And it's basically an insurance policy when the drought comes, because water is stored hopefully into the groundwater during the wet years, but then is used also during the drought year. And I'll show you what happens. Water use of California crops, these are ranked based on the total amount of, let's say, that factors in the acreage, and the specific water demand is calculated with, estimated by Department of Water Resources. In the last few years, there was an inversion between pasture and alfalfa and pistachio and almond. Until alfalfa was the top water user, it was a big mess. All this guy got all the blame and saying, oh, you're exporting a lot of water from California. When we got the inversion, almonds and pistachios, everything got silent. But it's funny because the alfalfa guys got the blame, but without the production of alfalfa, the dairy industry will not be so profitable. And so we cannot really consider alfalfa just as a single crop, but as part of the supply chain for another sector. So, you got also some politics involved here, all right? So this is again, the acreage, production, and values of most of the permanent crop, which represent a lot of income generation in California. You got almonds, grape, walnut, pistachio, and citrus. Those are the 5 main permanent crops. You can see they rank differently based on their acreage. And I would say the value is what really matters here, because you got basically grapes. If you combine grapes, let's say wine grape, table grapes, and raisin all together, this is the first #1 income generation crop in California, permanent crop in California. All right, so what we see is a long-term challenge, long-term trends. First of all, population is increasing at a fast rate and is projected to be continuously increasing in the near future. And that has 2 main implications. One, as we need basically more food for the domestic market, more safe food for the domestic market, because we have to feed more people. But also there's another point that, when population increase, then more houses are going to be built. And those houses are normally built not in the marginal soil, they're built on the prime land. And so there's a progressive loss of prime agricultural land, fertile land. And that means that we basically shrinking the amount of land that has to produce food. And so that means basically that we have to produce in less fertile land, and this is a challenge in the future, because less fertile land will require more nutrient and more water. All right. So this is a map. It's not very visible, but the green is where you see most of the projection of population increase, and you can see everything is basically concentrated in the Central Valley, San Joaquin Valley, and a little bit on the coast. So this is where there will be, much more high challenges to face in the future. Weather is changing also. What is changing, you see here a projection, what's actually the historical change in the maximum temperature, minimum temperature, and mean temperature. Wherever you see the highest intense red, this is where the change is happening. So the minimum temperature is increasing. That means milder winter, less water that comes as a snow, more that comes as a rain. Okay, and I told you the most important storage in California is the snow, but this is also other implication. I'll show you here. So warmer winter temperature, that warmer, let's say minimum temperature, means warmer temperature during the winter, more precipitation fall as a rain instead of snow. So it means we got progressively less stored water on the Sierra. And then this snow melts quick. I mean, it melts faster, and it melts during time that when agriculture doesn't need it actually. And I'll show you here what is happening. This is the spring snow melt from the Sierra Nevada. As see over time is declining during basically spring. Okay, this is our flow that gets stored into the surface reservoir. So if it's declining, it means that it happens before spring. So it happens in winter. So as you can see here, there's basically this is this historical curve, and the peak of snow melt and flow accumulation happens during the winter. But the storage reservoirs have to keep some room there for flood protection, right? So basically, this water, due to the shift in snow melt, happens and it cannot be stored because it has to be released, because the storage reservoir, they have to accommodate, so they have to leave some room empty for additional flooding events. All right. So the other trend that we are observing is that irrigated agriculture is basically concentrating where there's more secure water supply. This is the delta, and as surface water, this is basically the Central Valley and the San Joaquin Valley that has groundwater. This is an insurance policy, and this is the low desert. So the Imperial Valley that has, as you know, imports from the Colorado River Basin. And what we are seeing is basically these three areas together, they supply basically 35% of the U.S. food, but this production of the U.S., 35% of the national food happens only on 1.2% of the area of the U.S., okay? But what we're seeing here is basically there's a cropping patterns are becoming more and more intensive. So we got conversion from annual crop to perennial crop, and those are mostly fruit and nuts, orchards and vineyards. And we got higher planting density because we're losing ground, and so we have to intensify the production per acre, right? And there's a shift, there's a general shift from surface irrigation to micro irrigation because it allows better control on water, better control on nutrient. I want to show you this, and this shift is somehow encouraged by financial incentives, so like EQIP, SWEEP, and all this that provides financial help to growers to move from surface irrigation to sprinkler and micro sprinkler and drip. Here's what I wanted to show you what is happening. Basically, in this graph, you see the percentage of acreage that is by gravity, so surface irrigation. You see over time it decreases up to 30%. And on the green line, you can see the percentage in drip that increase over time. So basically, this trend is continued. So we got more drip, less surface irrigation system. The sprinklers stay pretty much the same, and there's some increase in the other system. And here, so growers, what they do when they want to move to a more precise irrigation, they basically also change crops because more precise irrigation is an investment, and so that investment needs to be somehow justified by a more valuable crop. But you can see here that the percentage of field crops, so annual crop, went down, and the percentage of orchards and vineyards went up. So this is what is coming out from a regular survey that every 10 years, DWR and the UC Davis are conducting, sending out questionnaire and getting back question and analyzing data. So this is a clear trend, and what is happening in the reality is that with this system, you need water more frequently, all right? So this water that you need every 2 days or every day, can that water be delivered by the water district with the frequency that you need? So normally, most of the water districts were designed for surface irrigation, and so they deliver water every 7 days or every 10 days. If I'm a grower and I have almonds, can I wait 10 days to irrigate? Probably not. So even if I can get water from the district every 10 days, I pump because I cannot survive with that frequency. So water infrastructure needs to be probably modernized with a lot of investment. And so this is a basically, even if we have that water, the frequency of demand with respect to the frequency of delivery is a mismatch. And so, yeah, all right. So I'll stick around because you need more. This is what is happening in the San Joaquin River, specific for the San Joaquin River. So the trend is more clear. It's even more clear and more pronounced because it's where we got most of the orchard. And the economic productivity of water, anyway, is increasing. So we produce more dollars per unit of water. But this has an environmental cost. Okay, this is an environmental cost, and most of the environmental cost is this. Is basically groundwater pumping overdraft. This is a map released by the Department of Water Resources that show where the groundwater overdraft is basically located. This is the change between 2011 and 2017 as a result of all this higher technology irrigation, intensification of crops, intensification of orchards and vineyards. All in all, this is one of the costs of this higher productivity that we're looking for because the population increased. All right? So, and this is what is happening in the groundwater. Basically, you see the big sharp decline in the dry year, a little bit of recovery during the wet year, but it doesn't have the same magnitude. And then again, another drop, okay? Overall, the trend is very clear and very sharply declined. And this has brought the sigma that you are all familiar with. I will not go into details with this. And it has brought also the basin prioritization, high and medium basin priority, need to somehow put in place GSA and put in place GSP and all that. What to expect, this is my final slide, what to expect in the near future according to what I've seen in the last 6 years, is the water supply would be shrinking, it would be limited and more regulated for all users. And basically water rights and water tariff need to be somehow reconsidered and revisited. Larger percentage of water will be shifted from agriculture to other sectors, either environmental or municipal or industrial. And climate change is gonna have more pronounced effect on this aspect. So we have to be prepared to higher fluctuation, higher magnitude, environmental situations like heat, frost, and drought. Basically, those are going to come with probably higher intensity, higher magnitude, and higher frequency. And in the agricultural system, in the agricultural production, we probably need cropping systems that use less water, or we have to be content with less water, or we have to be more skilled to manage that water more productively. And if you ask me, I don't know how to do it yet. And adapt to lower quality water, or augment the supply using the treated wastewater reuse, and that's still expensive. And crop that can benefit from rainfall and flow capture during fall and winter. So groundwater recharge, or basically manage groundwater recharge during the dormant season that can take care of that leaching of the salt and make everything less viable from the environmental point of view. I'll stop here. I'll indicate some useful links that we put together with the University of California about water. And those are links that you can explore in order to get some more. We recorded like 74 webinars by experts on the different aspects related to drought. This is an online resource that is always available. That was my first project with the University of California. I'm pretty proud. It's my baby. So, I thank you all for your patience, and I'll be around until 1. So
you got about 3 minutes.
Okay, can you put that other slide, the one that has sustainable groundwater? Oh yeah. Go back. If you're not aware of this and you're not plugged in, you need to get plugged in, okay? Because the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act is, for the very first time, California is now regulating our groundwater. Okay, we have to manage our groundwater better. Okay, that's what the law says. And so, I know that the doctor touched on this very quickly, and we can do a whole segment on this by itself. But if you're not aware of it, and if you're not plugged in, you need to get plugged in, because this is going to develop California's future as we move on. If you live in the Central Valley, you're in a critically overdrafted basin. Okay, that means our plan needs to be developed by 2020, January 31st, 2020, the plan needs to go in, okay? And we need to begin implementation right after that as well too, okay? So if you're not plugged in, get plugged in, and right now there's a process where everybody, all the agencies, the GSAs are developing and adopting their plans. So, if you haven't been plugged in, get the plan and start reading it, because it's gonna be critical that you all know that moving forward. Senator.
And that plan, those plans are gonna determine whether there's land that's followed or not. And when we talk about 1 million acres, 500,000 to 1 million acres, this is a plan that's going to have a tremendous impact on whether that acreage stays or not. And so this really is critically important.
And let me add on to that. It's gonna affect the Central Valley more than any place else. So, you know, you're gonna see economic impact, we're gonna see social-economic impact. We don't know what this is gonna bring yet, but it ain't gonna be pretty.
So let me just add to that, because I'm gonna kind of just set the picture here, is that every single GSA, which is these ground sustainability, these ground, the challenge with the way that this is being done is that we pretend like our counties make sense, being divided from each other, and that our watershed isn't part of a big system, right? We chop it up and we say, here are these different entities. And so, so part of the challenge is you have all of these GSAs, which are these kind of like governing organizations that are gonna say, here's our water, here's how we're gonna handle it, and this is how we're gonna fill or replenish groundwater. And it's as if it's not tied in together. And so this is gonna be a process that's gonna take years to kind of figure out. I believe that some of the GSAs are gonna end up merging because they have to, out of necessity, and that they'll start sharing information and infrastructure in order to be able to do it. But I think that the challenge is that we have tremendous pressures in the Central Valley from the Silicon Valley for housing. And so we not only are trying to grow our economy so that we have better jobs and more jobs, better jobs, higher paying jobs, but we're also starting to house on the west side, the Silicon Valley, and that tremendous pressure will continue. But we're not gonna have the water to even grow. And so the question becomes, if we're putting 1 million acres out of production, and that's kind of looks like it's the worst case scenario, people aren't gonna have jobs. It's not that they're not gonna have high paying jobs, they're just not gonna have jobs. And we're gonna have to figure out, how do we sustain the valley when the jobs are disappearing? And maybe solar farms are taking their place, which doesn't hire, you put them in, they're not economic development. And at the same time, we're gonna be traveling to to other regions, and their grasses are gonna be green, their golf courses are gonna be manicured, and they're going to be economically booming, which is Silicon Valley has created this incredible economic engine, but we're not gonna have it. And so this is really critically important, because you know that this area gets much less than the rest of the state in terms of resources. And so we gotta be at the table so that we can start looking at ways to be able to build the infrastructure. So for example, as a snapshot, all of these drip irrigation projects that have gone in have been tremendous, but there's this mismatch in the delivery of water. Worse than that, when there's a very rainy year and we can take some of that flood water, put it on sandy soils, and start to help the aquifer, which helps Sigma, which gets into the aquifer. We've pulled out all of the infrastructure to be able to flood. You can't flood anymore. You do drip, you can't flood. And so we've asked farmers to go back in and put that back in again, and it's tremendously expensive for them to go back and put in something that they've taken out. And so we've got to figure out, how do we get them to flood? And how do we get the cities to protect the land, that's the sandiest soil, so they can continue to recharge the aquifer and not build on it. And so we're kind of at this point where we need to inform ourselves, and then we need to start saying, look, I don't mind passing legislation telling cities they can't grow on that particular kind of soil, but I'm gonna need your help, because that's gonna be a tough road to hoe, right? It's tough to go to cities like your own and say you can't grow on that land. I know you've had it in your 20-year plan for growth, but you can't do it anymore because this has changed everything. And if we're gonna really survive this and not fallow this much land, then we're gonna have to work together and figure out what are some of the solutions.
I also think, Senator, that we have to have a frank conversation about whether we put to bed Temperance Dam. As a city, we've been paying for the exploration of above ground storage when we know it's cheaper and better for Sigma in the cities to do underground storage. But yet we keep on getting agriculture to demand above ground storage and energy there. Secondly, as a city, we're asked to grow because of the housing crisis. Madeira's growing like boom doggos, but it's draining our aquifers. And now we're having to share the consequence. So asking our ratepayers to pay for the overpumping of another jurisdiction or another industry is also a tension point that we're gonna have to deal with, because as a city, we are recharging more than anybody else. We're doing conservation more than anyone else. Our incomes aren't growing because we're still relying on agriculture. Yet we're asking our ratepayers, the poorest people, to increase their water rates to pay for overpumping from ag, for growth from cities that are not being held accountable for overpumping. So it's gonna be a place where rural, and I grew up in the rural town of Mendota. Parents all worked in fields. That's the livelihood that they have. But we also gotta at some point wrestle with diversifying the economy so we're not fully reliant on one industry.
That's right. That's exactly right. You made, all of those points are absolutely true. That's part of our challenge.
I can comment. One of the aspects that I think is always overlooked.
That's council member in the city of Fresno.
Is energy. So energy is one of the biggest costs on the farming budget. And so when you have to pump and pump and pump, like, you go lower and lower, you drill deeper. Energy is going to be a very higher cost, and also the grid, the power grid in California was not designed to support all that. So utilities are starting also curtailing the energy during some part of the day, some part of the season, and coming up with a financial incentive for growers to do so. And so we always, when we sit at the table with CDFA, we always suggested to keep that farmer be incentivized to keep whatever they had in place and build a system so in order to have flexibility during dry year and during wet year to use beneficially this water on the farm. And I don't know if we've been heard for the SWEET program on that sense. I don't know. But we always insist that you don't have to shift, because this is a misconception that micro irrigation will save the world in terms of water. We got more water use, more energy use, more greenhouse gas emission for production. Sure, but that is the only objective.
Thank you for that. We can get on. No. This is an important subject. If you guys don't mind, I want to continue this a little bit more. Armando.
I'm going to be talking later about a lot of the things that have come up, but one thing that you mentioned with regards to the impact of climate change on farming, which is really important, is with the shift with the nighttime temperatures being warmer, there are a number of crops that are not getting the chill time that they need. Right?
Yeah.
And so it's not a water issue, it becomes a climate issue. And so the complexity of what we have to deal with in California is shifting sort of in all directions.
Yeah. I got this slide off because it was it took like 4 minutes, 5 minutes to explain, but we see this shift. For instance, from Bakersfield, cherries are shifting into the San Joaquin County because of the chill. And so there's also shift in crops because they don't get the chill, chill fraction for breaking the dormancy. And so, this will shape up in increasing the water demand or decreasing the water demand. But I think overall, this misconception about microirrigation is creating more problem and more ecologic problem than, of course, it's creating a lot of benefit. And when we go into automation of the system, you cut more jobs. And because you don't have an irrigator, they are responsible, but you just the technology that is thinking, people are thinking the technology will solve the problem. That's not the case in irrigated agriculture in California. I don't think so.
Thank you for that. Okay, so one last pitch. Everything that we talk about here at the very end with that Sigma, that's what Sigma has to do. Okay. All right, I think now we can take a break, I believe, and you got about, well, we got into it, so you got 2 minutes now.
Alma, I need to call Vance. Can you get me your phone?
Good. Oh, really? Good. Yeah, we all got home last night, right? Yeah, same time, okay, see, we're not out. Let's watch. Yeah, right there.
That's all I wanted.
That's good, so you're gonna be updating us with that?
Hey, girl.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
Hi, this is Brianna from upstairs. I'm going to put the speaker for us.
I don't know. I guess just
See you with you.
Well, anyways, we'll see you. Good to see you. I'm gonna be here.
Hi, Maria. Nice to meet you. Yeah, great to finally see your face. I'm glad you were able to make it this morning. I hope it's been interesting. And have you been getting my email sent when I sent you the agenda afterwards?
No. You're talking at random.
What's your email?
You can try to gmail.com
Okay, because if you find my updates about the untitled, you isn't that is a problem because we've been sending you information. Okay, so I'm gonna start emailing you on this email.
Perfect, that'd be way better.
I'll resend you all the information about next steps and everything.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, I'm glad we connected because I know I've been waiting for a phone call from you. That was our next step.
No, you'll be getting phone calls.
Okay, good. So I'll resend everything to this email now, except apparently Hanford is not.
No, because it's the whole spam filter stuff. It's so weird.
Okay, so this will be it.
Yeah, this will city.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Go ahead.
Thank you for coming up. We can stuff them right there. Did the presentation work? Let me check right now. I also want to give this to you so you can have it on the speakers. Okay. Oh, do we need the whole thing? Sure. We'll just spread them out. I'll get out of your way.
Ever since they, when I get the books, I can call the
Yeah.
It's been really slow. It's 24.
Well, it's because it's just a computer, you know?
We have one that was trying to start with, but it was.
I think you're gonna have to download it. We also did get an adapter up here, Veronica, if you wanted to try that. Oh, from my computer? Yeah. Can you get in here?
Hey, if I can have everybody's attention, we need to get going again to stay on time, so could somebody yell at those folks out there?
Yeah.
I don't mean yell.
I'm gonna give you my number on your
We could just connect it from my computer, it'll be faster.
Okay.
Oh, does that mean the speaker should be set up on your
The
speaker
speaker
then?
should be here, yeah. Oh. Well, here we go.
So that means we should take out the HDMI of
and
mine.
connect it over here, yeah. Let me just...
Oh gosh, that was still going.
So then we're gonna, I'm gonna get going already. Yeah, yeah. So, right now, that's the ones we're recommending. I don't know. I don't know how people.
It's not.
All right, well, what's for you? And then we'll see on this week, Thursday, we're gonna have one.
Okay.
Okay, can we get everybody in and have their seats?
Can you try downloading?
It's still downloaded.
I know you guys got a birthday party or something to get to, so.
Hey Gary, you may need like 2 more minutes just to get the presentation up.
Minutes to get the presentation going.
But you can start bringing folks in.
How do you connect it up there?
I was disconnected from the transmitter.
Oh, this? Oh, we could try that.
Yeah, that's fine. Could you stick around, Vance, for when she's done to plug it back into the transmitter for mine?
Okay.
Perfect.
How do I do this?
Take the speakers. Oh.
The last glass of water, yeah. Veronica, are we ready?
Yeah, we were trying to figure out the slides up.
All right, as we get ready to. All right, we took a break. We're coming back, keeping the conversation going. Environmental justice for all, water for all, human rights to water.
Excellent. What a
Hey,
great
everyone, if I
That's a
can have your
commercial.
attention real quick. If I can get your attention real quick. By the way, if you really enjoyed this, okay, there's an evaluation form that's in the back of the agenda, and if you could fill those out and drop them off in the back over here, that'd be truly appreciated. And then, and then the other thing is, by the way, if you want to put in here that you need to pay Gary more to do this. Oh, wait a minute, I'm not getting paid, okay?
How about the coffee?
Then the other thing is the well, okay? We're having a conference on March the 21st, or the 20th to the 21st. If you want to know more about it, Victor's the man right here, and he'll provide you that information in terms of what that's going to be. You've got a taste of what that's going to be like, and it's going to be great. Victor, you wanted to talk about one last thing?
Yeah, someone asked, how do we do more of these? Well, we have Rodrigo and Ray who put this together. Also with Jose from San Joaquin, he was part of our first cohort of Untapped. This is a result of the Untapped Fellowship that WELL does. It's a 6-month fellowship for local elected officials, and we're starting our 3rd class in January. So if you're interested in being part of this learning experience, Alma's here and Brianne's in the back. They have information on the fellowship. But this workshop came as a result of the fellowship. Rodrigo and Ray met with Senator Caballero back in June, I believe, Senator, and asked her if this was something that was a good idea for her district. She said yes, and so we started working it. These workshops are happening all over the state of California. Speaker Renda is going to have one in 3 weeks. Senator Archuleta is having one in January. And so we're doing this throughout the state. So this is a result of the Untapped Fellowship.
Victor, I have a quick question. Is the fellowship application deadline already passed?
It has, but if you talk to Alma today, or Brad, we'll look at see if there's any exceptions.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Victor. Okay, now that we're all back from our break, our next speaker is Veronica Garibay Gonzalez. She's with the Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability. She'll be speaking on the role of the community. That's what most of you are here, the community, and your need to get involved with legislation as well, community involvement in legislation.
Thank you, Gary. Hi, everyone.
everyone. My name is Veronica Garibay. I'm the co-executive director of Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability. We are a local social and environmental justice organization based in the San Joaquin and East Coachella valleys. We are a team of 25 across 4 offices: Coachella, Bakersfield, Fresno, and Sacramento. And our work really focuses on addressing sort of the holistic and interdisciplinary issues that impact lower income communities and communities of color in inland California. Those include affordable housing, land use, transportation, air quality, climate, water, and basic infrastructure. And water is a big, major component of our work, from the very local to the regional to the state. And so I'll talk a little bit about how how we do the work in community and why community plays such a key and integral role in water management and water policy in California. And we've had, I've been listening to the conversations a lot in the morning, and we've been talking a lot about water and ag and water supply and water budgets. And yes, of course, our agricultural economy is important in the region, but there's also the fundamental right to the fundamental right to safe drinking water in California. 6 years ago, the state declared it a human right to have access to safe and affordable drinking water for basic sanitation purposes. And so there's a layer of complexity and a really important component to the larger narrative that we need to be careful about not excluding from how we talk about water management in California. So I'll talk a little bit about that today. Our portfolio sort of around water includes ensuring safe and affordable drinking water at the tap in the home. So we're working with a few dozen communities throughout the San Joaquin Valley that don't have safe drinking water today, to make sure that they are either connected to a larger system that has safe drinking water, or that we're working with the State Water Board to put in treatment facilities in place to ensure and facilitate safe drinking water in people's homes. The other is groundwater protection. So we know that contamination is a real issue. How many of you were following the CV SALT process, the State Water Board this week? Paul, Senator Gary, a few others. It's a really important topic about how much discharge we're allowing onto our groundwater, and how, one thing is the state to put up millions of dollars for safe drinking water, and on the other end, we're allowing and not really addressing the issue at the source and at the root of the problem. And so we're looking at these issues from both sides and trying to figure out how do we be more sustainable in water management in California. And then the other one is affordability. We know that water rates, that low-income communities can't afford prohibitive, like really expensive monthly water rates. If you are making $24,000 a year for a family of 4, and you're paying more than 10% of your income alone just on water, how much does that leave you for housing, for rent, for mortgage, for transportation, for food, for medicine? These are all different components that we have to think about. And then vulnerability, our supply. We've heard a lot about supply. With the last 2 speakers, we've heard a lot about the threats, the very real threats and impacts of climate change that it's real. It's not something that somebody is making up, that we do have to account for it in how we think about and plan for water. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about that, and there's a slide missing in here, but there are, I think, the drinking water challenges. If you're in the valley and you work in the valley or you study in the valley, you know that there are very real issues. There's water vulnerability and source vulnerability. Most vulnerable are homes and low-income households reliant on domestic wells for their drinking water. Small public water systems that sometimes don't have the technical, managerial, and financial capacity to operate and maintain drinking water systems to meet MCL standards and comply with all the state regulations. There's also a quality problem. It's nitrate, it's CDCP, it's Chrome 6, it's TCP, it's a number of contaminants that we're seeing in varying degrees in a number of communities. And then finally, there's also this very important link between land use and water management, and we've never really integrated it in a very effective way. If you look at, from the way we looked at zoning ordinances and general plans and specific plans and land use planning documents that each city and county sort of work on, you see sort of the separation and not really integration of water supply and availability and water quality and how that meshes or doesn't mesh with land use growth. And this is a slide that I really wanted to point out because we don't think about it. We worked with UC Davis, Center for Regional Change, and Professor Jonathan London a year ago to co-author this report that's called The Struggle for Drinking Water in the San Joaquin Valley. And they only looked at disadvantaged unincorporated communities, and whether they have access to safe drinking water, how close they are to a source of safe drinking water, and they also looked at race indicators to see who's impacted the most. And we know that it is Latinos and farm worker communities that are disproportionately impacted by not having safe drinking water in their home. This study found something interesting. So it's not a very good map. If you're not close enough, if you're like me, you won't be able to see it from the back of the room. But it shows all the little brown, the little brown circles are within 500 feet of a water system that could provide them with safe drinking water. The next level, the lighter the brown shade goes, that's how further away you are from a source of safe drinking water. And it found that there's about 100, and this is in the valley, 148 disadvantaged unincorporated communities who don't have safe drinking water today are with less than 500 feet from a larger public water system or a different source of water that could provide them with safe drinking water if the appropriate infrastructure investments are made. So if the investments were made to allow the capital to run through, to allow the connections to happen, that's 67% of the disadvantaged unincorporated community population that could have access to safe drinking water. And what we see, the picture that you see up at the top is Renata, Padma, and Tim from the community of Matheny Tracts, right outside the city of Tulare. This community was sort of, there was annexation patterns. LAFCOs are really important and really important players. If you don't know what LAFCOs are, those are the local agency formation commissions in each county, are really important decision-making bodies that sort of allow for the growth patterns of cities and annexations to happen. And in Tulare, the city of Tulare grew up to the very border of Matheny Tract, and Matheny Tract was contaminated with really high levels of both nitrate and arsenic. And the solution was, connect them to safe drinking water. The community organized, won an agreement with the city of Tulare. The city of Tulare would extend safe drinking water services to the community to no cost to city of Tulare ratepayers. The state was going to put in the infrastructure, the community was going to pay a bill just like everybody else pays a water bill. They weren't going to get it for free. Through a lot of barriers, and for multiple reasons, the city put in a lot of really, the state water board put in $5 million in the ground to allow for all the piping and the capital connections to happen, and the city of Tulare still wouldn't allow the connection to go forward. So we worked with the community at the state level. This is why it's so important to work with our state representatives to pass SB 88. How many of you know what SB 88 is? Some, Gary. SB 88 gives unprecedented authority to the State Water Resources Control Board to order cities and jurisdictions to extend drinking water services to communities that are in close proximity to them if they have failed to meet consistently failed to provide safe drinking water to their communities. Matheny Tract was the first community and the first order that went out 2.5 years ago. In California, there are a few. The State Water Board does provide a period, and state law provides for a period of voluntary consolidation to allow the city and the community and State Water Board and other stakeholders to come to a solution before an actual order is issued. In Matheny Tract, the order was issued, and that was the day they turned the valve, turning the water system on. But as you can see, that land use sort of plays a really critical role, and if we planned more holistically, if we talked about how to really integrate land use and water and housing and septic. Thank you, Senator, for saying we need to connect people on septic to wastewater systems. We don't have to live like this. Communities don't have to live without being able to drink water from their tap, and don't have to go to the store and buy 5 gallons jugs of water. We don't have to work at the state level to get millions of dollars every year to address this problem. If we really integrated and collaborated in a more intentional way from the very local to the state, it could really go a long way. So that's land use. I was surprised that Sigma wasn't a bigger topic earlier today, just given the importance to the region, and you all talked about it before the break today, so you stole a little bit of my thunder. But there's, how many of you have seen your plans? So Merced, Madera, Fresno, Tulare, Kern, your plans are out. How many? And some of them, the public comment period has closed. How many of you provided comments to your GSA? Very few people in the room. How many of you were briefed about what was in, if you're an elected official, how many of you were briefed by what's in your plan? Okay, not very many hands went up. And how many of you went to any meeting related to the Groundwater Sustainability Agency? Okay, well, a little more hands. As was noted already, Sustainable Groundwater Management Act is going to impact sort of how we grow, how the availability of water resources and water supply for our communities and groundwater quality. For those of you who are not familiar with the SGMA, as it's the acronym that's used for it, it requires 3 things: to form groundwater sustainability agencies in California. As Gary noted, we are in an overly critically overdrafted area, which means we go first. Our plans are due to the state by January 31st, 2020, which is why many plans are already out for public review and comment. Those agencies have been formed. There are multiple agencies even within a county. They all have to coordinate with one another, but there are multiple, and it depends on where you are located. It's how you can find which GSA you belong to. They have required to develop a groundwater sustainability plan, which lays out how that subbasin will reach sustainability in 20 years from now, by 2040. That includes all of them, what the sustainability goal is, how are we defining sustainability, what the sustainable management criteria is going to be, what are those undesirable results that we don't want to see, what are our measurable objectives, like what do we want to aspire to, what do we want to have, make sure that we have supply, good drinking water, we protect against land subsidence, sea level intrusion, seawater doesn't really apply to us, but there are big components here, and these are really important. You have to look at what your water budget is going to be, to work with hydrologists and scientists to identify how much water do you actually have access to, and look at historical data to inform what the water budget and what the current groundwater conditions are in each basin for each GSA. So it's really important information. And finally, the GSAs must implement their groundwater sustainability plan through a series of policies and practices included in the plan, but also what is called project and management actions. Most of those include recharge type projects and other ways that the GSA believes that it can make sure that it has sufficient water supplies to meet existing and future needs of all stakeholders. So this is a really important component. SGMA is not just for the agricultural community or protecting from land retirement. SGMA is also supposed to protect the availability of water, the good groundwater quality for all beneficial users. That includes disadvantaged communities and communities relying on domestic wells throughout our state. That's the perspective that where we're coming from in our engagement has been in 14 groundwater sustainability agencies in the valley is the ones that we, Leadership Council, is working on. And there are a lot of challenges. To date, we have submitted 5 comment letters to GSAs in Merced, all the Cahuillas, Mid-Cahuilla, Grande Cahuilla, and East Cahuilla in Tulare County. We're drafting for current GSA, Westlands Water District. We're also working with them on that one, and the Kings Basin, submitting comment letters to a lot of them. And so what we're seeing is very troubling for disadvantaged communities and for vulnerable water users, those on domestic wells, those relying on small community water systems. That includes, there are really no protections for drinking water quality. Some of the GSAs have taken the position that it's not their responsibility to really look at or address groundwater quality protections as part of their plans. That's one of the sustainability indicators is looking at groundwater quality that is required by state law. Hundreds of wells are going to go dry. So you look at these plans, and it'll tell you how many wells are expected to go dry, and there is no plan or no mitigation program or any sort of thoughtful program that will address what happens when these wells go dry. And this is across the board. And there are no protections for the most vulnerable households, which happen to be low-income Latino communities. Little to no monitoring of groundwater quality or groundwater levels. I'm going through all of this really fast, and it's really technical, but all of our comment letters are posted on our website, so people are happy to go look at them. But the monitoring networks that the GSAs are going to set up to monitor for groundwater levels, to look at groundwater supplies, we're seeing that there aren't monitoring wells where there needs to be monitoring wells. There's not enough of them to address all the basin concerns, and it's become really problematic. And then finally, project and management actions are not always in the benefit of water users. There seems to be this narrative that it's only about protecting ag and protecting against land retirement, which we're not saying is not important. What we're saying is you have to take into consideration the human right to water in California, and that people need access to safe drinking water in their homes, and that needs to be at the top of the priority list. And finally, closed-door decision-making. There are several GSAs where these plans were crafted outside of the public process, outside of public meetings, and so when the plan came to be discussed at, say, a GSA board or an advisory board, the plan was already cooked. Even if you're sitting in the room and you're trying to provide comments, it's not going to go very far because the consultants and the engineers and the GSA and all their staff have already developed and made decisions on what's going into these plans. And so that has made it very
I
challenging.
just want to make a really quick point about this slide because it's so important. I mean, looking at that list, can you imagine if somebody was operating their surface water supply like this? It wouldn't happen.
Yeah.
You know, and my point is that one of the difficulties with groundwater is that it is abstract. And so that's part of the problem. I'm going to be talking about this later, but I just think that's a really critical slide because we would not let this happen if we could see it.
And there are wells still going dry today, and there are people who still don't have running water in their homes today. The governor declared the drought over, but the drought is not over for many families and many communities in the valley, and so that's a very real issue. And the last thing I'll say is that there is a backstop. So the GSAs are going to submit their plans, send them to the Department of Water Resources. The Department of Water Resources is going to review these plans. Like my sense is likely over the next 2 years. It would probably take about 2 to 3 years for them to review all of these plans. And you know, the state is going to play a critical role here around what happens. And the Department of Water Resources, because of the human right to water in California, is required to really look at these and analyze these plans and consider the human right to water in California when they're looking at these. I was going to play a 5-minute video but I may be over time. I can play it if you want, or they'll let me. But this is really important. That there's a lot of.
I think it's important enough. Go ahead.
Okay. So
We'll give you 3 minutes.
Hand up.
You have no other capacity to get water except to purchase water or to have the support of the state to provide water, bottles, jugs, on a bi-monthly basis. Explain a little bit more in detail the impact of not having what so many of us take for granted, and that's the ability to turn on the tap and have clean, safe drinking water.
Dice, adentro le estaban platicando sobre las condiciones.
Yo vengo de gente migrante que vinimos a este país a una vida mejor, pero también contribuimos. Trabajamos en el campo. Toda mi familia es, vengo de un padre bracero que toda su vida trabajó en el campo. Hay mucho orgullo, ¿no? El desarrollo en esta comunidad no hay mucho desarrollo, o sea, estamos muy abandonados. Tenemos agua muy contaminada con arsénico. No tenemos luces, no tenemos banquetas, no tenemos drenaje. Además pagamos impuestos como cualquiera. Queremos ver mejoras para que nuestra gente, tanto los ancianos, los niños y los jóvenes vivan una vida más decorosa, más saludable. Mejorar, poner presión a que la gente que tiene el poder venga y examine realmente cuál es la calidad de vida de nuestra gente. No es un lujo tener un sistema de drenaje, tener agua limpia, tener calles que sean iluminadas. Es una necesidad y es un derecho humano, que cualquier ser humano tenemos derecho. No estar descuidados. ¿Cómo trabajar juntos? Yo soy abierta a trabajar. No es estar contra de ellos. Trabajar juntos, como una familia. Porque al final de cuentas, el que gana es el país. Trabajando mano con mano, se puede edificar. se puede construir. Hacer un grupo, se llama la Comunidad Unida por la ENER. Vamos puerta por puerta invitando a los vecinos, únete, infórmate. La mesa de Sacramento no sale al pueblo, el pueblo tiene que ir a ellos. Entonces nosotros vamos. Nosotros como comunidad nos organizamos, visitamos el Capitolio muchas, pero muchas veces. ¿El por qué? Porque se necesita hacer un cambio. Nuestra gente sigue unida. Ahorita se perforaron 2 nuevas norias, las cuales se ha encontrado que hay agua buena. Se está cambiando todo lo que es la pipa principal por toda la comunidad. Fueron 10 años para llegar a este punto en que esta comunidad tenga agua limpia, en lo cual hemos ganado. Tenemos muchos proyectos en camino. Nosotros tenemos el poder si nos organizamos y actuamos. El pueblo tiene el poder. Esa es la democracia.
This will help make sure that no other community meets the fate that Lanier met. That the funds will be there to make sure that they have the resources to have safe drinking water in their tap. And for those of us who open our tap in our homes and can drink that water or cook with it, that privilege, that we don't take that for granted. Today we're getting closer to making sure that millions of Californians have safe drinking water today. We thank you for your leadership. We thank you for your willingness to work with us. And we thank the Assembly member and the senators, community residents, Dolores Huerta, and so many others. It was a coalition of 140 organizations throughout the state who supported this. This was a monumental effort, and as you see, the impact here is tremendous. Thank you.
All right. On that note, let's make this official. All right.
That's a great video.
Yeah, so that was, and Senator Caballero referenced it in her comments earlier today, that was a passage of SB 200, which took 10 years to pass in the legislature, which created the Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Fund in California. And one of the reasons why it is so critical and so important is that there is no other funding source in California like it today, because it will actually provide funding for ongoing operation and maintenance costs of treating contamination in disadvantaged communities. There's no other funding source for that. We thank Senator Caballero for her leadership and her work on that. And everybody, it really was a monumental effort. It really took 10 years, and it took 10 years to get safe drinking water in Lanier, and that's not acceptable. That is not, if we think that that's okay, shame on us. And it is all of our responsibility to make sure that all of our neighbors and families and friends have access to safe drinking water. This is a basic necessity, it's not a luxury. And we welcome the opportunity to work with all of you on all of these moving pieces as we go forward. Now SB 200, the money is there. Now let's make sure the State Water Board can get it through the door and out the door pretty quickly. So implementation of the fund, implementation of the groundwater sustainability plans and what that will look like. The governor issued an executive order on water resiliency. How many of you submitted comments to his water resilience portfolio before he issues his that goes really a few of you? How many of you knew that that was even happening? Yeah, so there's a lot of work. How many of you know about the Governor's Regions Rise Together initiative that's focused on inland California? So there's a lot of opportunities, and we can't lose sight of who needs to be at front and center, and how we need to be inclusive, and how we make decisions, and make sure that we're talking about diversifying our economy, thinking about who's paying for the costs of water and water management in California. So I'll stop there, but thank you.
was on the Lanier Community Service Board at that time. Remember that?
Yeah.
And what happened to that point? Because we were fighting for Riverdale to incorporate Lanier on the water system. And then I don't know, because I left, we got them to get water delivered to their location. What happened after that?
In Lanier, they drilled 2 new wells, both well below 1,000 feet, and found water that does not exceed any of the MTLs right now, and they replaced the entire distribution system in Lanier. Total cost of about $5 million to do that in the community of Lanier. So right now, water quality tests show that they are okay. In the future, consolidation is still an option. Lanier still does very much want sewer, so they're on dilapidated septic tanks. So we look forward to working with Senator Caballero on making that happen. But yes.
And Julie knows that lady in that video is phenomenal. She's so supportive of that community.
A little note, Huron was one of the first cities, if not the first city, to write a resolution, pass a resolution in support of SB 200. I think sometimes we just gotta jump up ahead and make sure that, our voice is heard and show support.
Thank you.
And you're absolutely right. Next time, we gotta do a whole section.
Is there a different hookup that's needed for the next
One of the things
presentation?
that I do want to
keep that.
in terms of stigma, before we get off that, I don't think we're gonna get off it entirely, but it's a living document, okay? That means that we're gonna continue to build on it, you're gonna continue to see changes in it. I'm sure there's gonna be legislation that are gonna require other things as well too. So, don't think that it's too late to get involved. I mean, it has to be all-inclusive, and that's what we need to do. But it only gets all-inclusive if we get involved, okay? So, our last speaker is Armando Quintero. He's with the California Water Commission. I've worked with Armando before. He's seen me in front of him giving testimonies. I've cornered him on the side, and but I got to tell you, he's got a big job. He's got a really big job, and in seeing how he administers that board, he does an excellent. The governor could have picked a better guy to lead that board, and Armando is the chairman of the California Water Commission, and he's tasked with understanding and addressing state water policy. Armando.
Thank you. Something funny is Victor and I met for coffee this morning, and we're both in the roles we're in because of our daughters. So it follows, the story of behind every successful male, these are some smart women. One of the things that I always do, I work at UC Merced. I'm executive director of the Sierra Nevada Research Institute. And we study air, water, and soil in the San Joaquin Valley in the Southern Sierra. And we have put together collaboratives that include top-notch researchers from all the UCs, from Davis, from Santa Cruz, Irvine, just all of them, because we really need all brains on deck right now. And a lot of the work that I've done in my role with the Water Commission has been to integrate the research community more fully and more regularly with the water decision makers in California. And I watched science and good conversations and thinking informed decisions that have been coming out of Sacramento. And in fact, at DWR, they've got one right now, but they have actually a research advisory committee. And so they have leaders within DWR matched up with UC researchers. And so it's a really great forum for exchanging information. Actually, I do have another role. I actually work for the university 80% of the time, and the 20% I reserve for working on the Water Commission. And I also serve on the water board where I live on the weekends. I live in Marin County, and I've lived there for quite a while. So I've been president of that board twice, so I understand how a small water utility works. And working at a university with water researchers, it's this deep well of wisdom that I get to tap into. And I've worked a lot in the San Joaquin Valley in the Southern Sierra. I was a national park ranger for 22 years and worked in Sequoia and Kings Canyon, so I'm familiar with a lot of the little towns, Visalia, Wood Lake, all the little towns down there. I have friends who live in those places, and I've been to a lot of them. So we can go to the first slide.
We are trying.
Okay, so I'll tell you a story. When I said our daughters influenced us, when my younger daughter was in 4th grade, she's now a PhD student actually. But when she was in 4th grade, I took her class on a field trip to Mount Tam, which is the watershed where we live. And I pointed out the water and the waterfalls and said, hey, this is our drinking water, and then talked about plants and trees, which is what we're going to do tonight. And weeks later, my little 4th grader screams for me in the house, and I go running and I find her in the bathroom. And she's standing in front of a toilet like this, and she goes, we're not flushing our toilets with that beautiful yeah. Yeah, just amazing. And the insights that I get from young people, students at UC Merced, it's really a rich resource for us to be paying attention to. Young people see the world differently than we do, and the solutions and the framing of the problems is very different, and we really need to pay more attention to them and give them, you know, the wisdom chalice or whatever. It's really, really important. And actually, 4 years after that comment about the toilet, the fellow who's now our congressman for our area, who was a friend of mine, called me and said, hey, there's a seat on the water board. You should run for it. And at dinner, I asked my wife and my 2 daughters, you know, should I do this? And that 4th grader was now in 8th grade, and she goes, I thought you said you couldn't do anything. Right? And so listen to the wise young people around you. I'm really glad that we got the presentations that I'm last, because you guys covered a lot of the stuff that I was going to talk about, but SGMA is on my agenda to talk with you about. The Water Commission was one of the bodies that we were the final approving body for the issuance of SGMA. And so, sorry about that. I can just start. I'm going to be talking about several things. I'm going to be talking a little bit about water context in California, and I'm going to talk about SGMA. I'm also going to talk about Prop 1 and the decision-making process that we did with the Water Commission. And then I'm going to talk about some of the legislation out there. AB 2480, which is watersheds as infrastructure, which is really important. SB 1755, which is the Open and Transparent Water Data Act, which is really critical. There was a recent law that was also passed called SB 19, which actually requires the installation of a whole new network of water gauges, stream gauges throughout the smaller streams and rivers in California, and that's really going to make a difference for smaller communities. And then I'm going to also talk about, and obviously it's going to be very short, I'm also going to talk about the executive order on water resiliency, the water resiliency portfolio. As a water commissioner, we held 2 listening sessions, and we brought in experts from around the state, and we actually, we had academic, local elected leaders, and subject area experts that came in, and we ran 2 full-day meetings to get input on what we consolidated into our.
Yay!
What happened? Oh, there you go. My wife and I started dating when we were 15, and she ultimately said she married me for my tortillas. Yes. Yeah, we.
Well, the cars are being
turned down the lights.
thrown out by the wind.
Thank you so much. When I started working at UC Merced 10 years ago, I thought, I'm going to see what the earliest satellite images that I could find of California. And when I put that in, this is what popped up. And I thought, what the heck? And what happened is a guy had photoshopped California to what he thinks it looked like in 1850. Okay, so there's Lake Tahoe, and those of you who know Tulare Lake, there it is. And it's several times the size of Lake Tahoe in surface area.
Wow.
And then I came across this map, which is really important because it was made in 1888. My grandmother was born, Francisca Lopez, was born in 1888. So the place that we're in right now in terms of California water, it took 3 generations. That's pretty stunning. And in this era of California, the Kern River, which runs back here, was actually connected to Tulare. And in heavier rain years, actually did flow. The current actually flowed all the way into the bay. The whole valley up here, there's maps that you can find where the entire San Joaquin and Sacramento Valley were full of, what's it called when you stick your shovel in the ground and water comes out? Artesian wells. The whole valley was artesian wells because the groundwater levels were right at the surface. And what happened is during the past droughts, the likelihood is that a few feet at the top of those groundwater basins actually evaporated up. But for the most part, that water was retained in the groundwater basins. Another thing is that, at Lake Tahoe and Tenaya Lake, when you drive over Yosemite, that lake at the very top, if you put on scuba gear and dive down about 150 feet, what you encounter is an entire mature forest standing at 150 feet down in those two lakes, and Lake Tahoe as well. That was a drought that happened in 800 and lasted 200 years. And so the evaporation was such that those lakes were dry for long enough for mature forests to develop now 150 feet down, which I just think is an important fact to know. And then the other thing about 1888, there were salmon processing plants in Hanford, and they were producing 1 million pounds of salmon out of there. And this isn't an environmental talk, this is the framework that we're working in, okay? So I'm going to talk about these things: Sigma, Prop 1, Green Infrastructure, Transparent Water Data Act, Water Resources, Executive Order, and then where I work at the Sierra Nevada Research Institute, because I think there's some hope there. So I'm going to skip this. This is a really important map that you should all have. Thomas Harder made this map, and it's critical. In a typical year, there's 15 million acre-feet of water in the snowpack of California. If you add all the surface reservoirs in California, they add up to 40 million acre-feet of water storage. And here's another critical thing. In the topsoils in the state, if they were all healthy and charged up, and I don't mean groundwater charged up, but healthy soils, they actually would hold 80 million acre-feet of water just in the soil. And what that would also add to is carbon sequestration and other factors that help sort of drive the climate change engine. Now here's the kicker. It's estimated that the groundwater basins represent 1 billion acre-feet of water. A billion acre-feet of water. And right now, there is, just in the San Joaquin Valley, it's estimated that there is 140 million acre-feet of space that we could put water in if we had the mechanisms to put the water into the ground. And so one of the things when I talked about when you were talking about the abstract notion of groundwater, I really hope that in the near future we start to see on the weather news in all of our regions those forecasters saying, here's where we are, and in terms of our community's aquifer, we have 100,000 acre-feet of available storage space beneath our feet. Because what we have to do is activate the citizenry to understand what we can do. And the gentleman in the back, I think, made a really important point in terms of building dams is an expensive business, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Putting water in the ground is a lot less expensive. And one of the critical things here is that with the Water Commission, and some of the recommendations that I personally was making to the executive order was that what we need to do as Californian agencies is we need to provide the information systems that allow for better local decision making. And so one of the things that we need to do, which we do not have right now, is subsurface mapping of this part of the valley, up and down the valley, that really shows you where the best recharge areas are. And there's a professor, Graham Fogg from Davis, one of your colleagues. He talks about the idea of having sort of recharge reserves, he called them, sort of these geographic areas that are outlined and preserved just for putting water back into the aquifer. And one of the things that I've been thinking about, you're all familiar with the Williamson Act? You know what that is? So the Williamson Act actually provides a financial incentive for a rancher to keep their land, keep their land in production. And I think I would love to see legislation that actually creates a Williamson Act-like benefit for the landowners out there who may have to take land out of production, but what if they could put it into the production of water? And one of the things that we're working on at the UC is looking at other ideas of how to generate economic return on lands like that. So for example, carbon sequestration, which can slow down climate change, and paying people for carbon sequestration. And that can be done through, some of the things that you can grow in those areas, and also healthy soils. Actually, there's a researcher at Merced, Azmaret Berhe. She's a soil scientist. She did a TED Talk in May, and Bill Gates actually texted out tweeted out a story about her, and he said, everybody in the world has to see this when it gets up on the web. And it came out in September, and she already has over 1 million hits. And one of the key points that she makes is that healthy soils actually can hold twice the carbon that all of the vegetation on the planet can hold. You know, and she talks about that science. So you see what I'm saying is that there's alternative ways to think about the places where we live, and hopefully we can make it a more sustainable state. And the other thing too about California, I'm not sure what I have next year. The other thing about California is we're one of 5 Mediterranean regions in the world. So there's the west coast of Chile, 2 areas on the west coast of Australia, and the tip of South Africa, California, and the Mediterranean. That's it. And what these areas share, when you think of a map of California, by Mediterranean systems, what that means is we have cold winters when there's snow in the high mountains, and then we get dry, hot summers. And so it's a perfect condition for where we live and do what we do. Have been able to use that water to grow healthy crops and plentiful crops in the spring and summer. And there's only and right now, the problems that we're facing in California are uniformly being faced by all 5 of those Mediterranean areas. And I think it's just really important to put that in context. And South Africa, if you remember in the news this last year, they actually hit a 0 day for water. And because of their conservation efforts, they were able to make it through. But anyway, I think it's important to also think about our region in the context of the world, because solutions here will inform the world. So Sigma, we already went through a lot of this, and I think one of the main issues about Sigma is that it promotes local control. And for those of you involved with Sigma, you understand that what's happening is we're creating a whole new set of water utilities that had not existed before. And having worked with the water utility for 11 years, it is tough to estimate what your costs are going to be, and it is tougher to get the funding. So I do think that the GSAs are going to need additional help to get launched, and part of that help is providing not only maps for where the best recharge areas are, but we're going to have to work on the infrastructure to make those work. And one of the things that I think about in terms of Sigma and its success in the future is 2 things. One of them is we're the last state in the United States to actually put groundwater laws in place. And it was considered in 1914 when we first started to regulate water in the state, and it was tabled. And so what's happened, and this isn't pointing the finger at anybody. Nobody did it, to be terrible. But we've actually been drawing down those aquifers for over 100 years, well over 100 years, 140 years. And we just did not have the science, did not understand that when we were disconnecting rivers to prevent floods and directing, we actually were shunting water out to the delta so that we could create farmland in the valley. And if we had known what we know now 100 years ago, we could have literally put the systems in place that could have continued to recharge these groundwater basins. And one of the things that was also mentioned by Dan, he was saying that Westlands is an old ocean floor, and basically what happened is the prevailing winds and things kept pushing the surface waters out there, and then it would dry out and leave salts behind. It just kept happening. Well, when you follow the schematic of what it looks like underground in the Central Valley, at the very bottom of the Central Valley, that's also an ocean floor. So as these wells get deeper, and it's already happening, you're probably aware of this, there are some wells that are hitting salt, right? So we've got a limited amount of time, I think, to be able to figure out how we put water in the ground and how we keep it healthy. And also, as the basins are filled, your power costs will be less. I mean, I have no idea what it costs to pump an acre-foot of water from 1,000 feet, but I'm guessing it's a lot. I have, one of my colleagues has a 200-acre almond ranch in Merced, and their water bill used to be, when they were recipients of surface water, their water bill was $600 a year for 200 acres. And I asked them what their electric bill was now. It's now $60,000 a year to run 2 wells. So I think Sigma, if it's successfully implemented, can really save us. And one of the things that's also happening is down in LA, last year, the year before, the citizens there actually voted a permanent tax on themselves, and it's generating $300 million a year. But here's what they're doing with it. They're actually creating stormwater capture projects out of the San Gabriel Mountains, and they're putting water treatment plants as a part of that, because what they've been doing is throwing that into the LA River and shunting it out to the ocean. And it looks like when they have that in place and all the infrastructure is working, they're actually going to be able to provide LA with 1/3 of its water demand. You know, and so I think that the solutions that we work at for the Valley need to look at the solutions that are happening in other parts of the state that give us additional options. So Prop 1 was a $7.5 billion bill. It started out, did you say it was 11 when it first started? And you can see that it was all about water quality, supply, and information. This bill was put together by a lot of people working together. It was farmers, legislators, there were agency folks. They were all working together to develop this bond. And one of the interesting things is the water storage amount, which was $2.7 billion, was directed to the Water Commission, and that part of the bond was actually something called a continuing appropriation. And what that means is neither the legislature nor the governor can easily redirect those funds. There would have to be, I think it's a two-thirds vote on the part of the legislature to put that money someplace else. And so what we had to do is we took the language in the bond and we had to develop regulations out of that. That had to go, it took us a year of meeting with the public, meeting with stakeholders. We had to send our draft regulations to the Office of Administrative Law, and they went through it to make sure that it reflected what was said in the bond and that it was legal. And it came back 2 months later with not even a spelling correction. So we stuck to it. The weird thing about Prop 1, for those of you who may have been involved in applying for it, and this was not invented by the Water Commission, this is what we were handed, is that money was to be directed toward that portion of water storage projects that was going to be public benefit water. So let me back up and give you a good example. If we were all in a water district and we decided to build a dam, and we went and got the permits for that dam, it would turn out that about half of that water that we store behind the dam would have to be released for downstream benefit. Communities that live downstream and sort of environmental benefits. And I think of environmental benefits really as quality of life benefits for everybody who's downstream from that water supply. So what this part of the bond actually did is it alleviated the local burden of having to pay for water that they weren't going to get. And so that was, in a simple way, that's what we had to evaluate with all the projects that came in. We got 12 applications. 4 of them didn't meet the criteria that we were looking for, and then we ended up funding 8 projects. So these were the benefits that we could fund. And again, this was directed by the bond language. So ecosystem improvements, water quality improvements, flood control, emergency response, and recreation. So this is what we ended up funding. And so we actually ended up funding 4 dams and 4 groundwater projects. Pacheco Reservoir Expansion Project essentially is a brand new dam. And it's connected to Santa Clara Valley water. One of the things about Pacheco Reservoir is that, I'll rush through this. Pacheco Reservoir actually prevents flooding of actually a large disadvantaged community that lives between Pacheco Valley and Santa Cruz. South County Ag, they're actually taking wastewater, treating it, and putting it in the aquifer in Sacramento. Los Vaqueros, they're expanding a dam for Contra Costa Water, and they're directing water specifically for wildlife refuges south in the north, actually just north of us, grasslands in those areas. And the wildlife refuges never had water that it actually owned. Temperance Flat got 171 million. I know they were asking for a lot more, but we worked really hard to try to find how we could fund what was in their project proposal, and really we bent over backwards, and that was what we were able to do. Chino, and then these are 4 groundwater projects, and a lot of these projects, what they did is the resulting groundwater they were going to be able to put in the ground through their projects actually had them leaving water up in Oroville. So there was a trade-off, so the Oroville water could be used for Sacramento for environmental purposes. AB 2480 allows forests to be recognized as infrastructure. On the water district where I work in Marin County, 3 years ago, we actually implemented and I have to say this, when you look at the cost of water in the West, I have a daughter who moved to Washington a few years ago, and I looked at her water bill. In Washington, the cost for a CCF, or 748 gallons of water, was $5. In the Bay Area, the average cost for a CCF was $3. Guess what it was in LA?
50.
$1. And that's because the way that the water rate structure is set up in California is water agencies can only divide up their cost of service, and that's how they act. So when you have a dense population, their water is really cheap. So what happens is we are in the embarrassing situation where I live in Marin, which is a wealthy community. Our average water bill is maybe $35, $40 a month. What is it in the valley for families? 80.
70 to 80.
Right. It's crazy. And so, anyway, I'm going to just, and then the Transparent Water Data Act is really critical, because what this does, it means that everybody who's managing water from the top of the Sierra down to the water basin has to exchange their information. And so right now the state is working to make that water information usable. We have to integrate data sets, and one of the things that we're trying to do at the state level, and I'm very involved with this, is getting State Water Resources Control Board, Central Valley Flood Board, the Water Commission to actually communicate much more regularly about what we're looking at. And what I'm thinking is that we get people like Veronica to come and talk to all 3 groups, so that we have, I'm serious, so that we have the same knowledge in hand as we're considering new policies and regulations for the state. It's a really, really important. And then the water resources stream gauges is actually, like I said, I think it's going to have a big benefit right now, particularly up in the wine country, because there are disadvantaged communities up there. But the wineries take as much water as they can, they put it in little ponds, but who's left without water when the streams go dry are the folks who rely on wells. Mm-hmm. The executive order basically said we need to prioritize multi-benefit approaches that meet multiple needs at once. Something interesting here is that DWR has reorganized several of their units to what's now called a multi-benefits branch, which literally takes from the crest of the Sierra all the way down to the groundwater basins, and they're now working together instead of having 5 or 6 groups having to communicate over the fence to each other about what they're doing. Need to utilize natural infrastructure such as forests and floodplains. One of the things that I would like to see personally is when we talked about AB 2480 that recognizes forests as infrastructure, I think groundwater basins should also be recognized as natural infrastructure. You said 30 minutes.
Oh, shit. I'm sorry.
So,
started all over again.
Yeah. Wow, I spoke really fast. But anyway, the executive order is really critical. And what I'm hoping is that the water bonds, which are being worked on right now, and my understanding is that there's 5, there's 2 in the Assembly, 2 in the Senate, and 1 with the Conservation Strategy Group, that I really hope that as that bond is put together, that it lines up with the governor's executive order. I think that's going to be really, really critical. Last slide. This is the kind of work we do at UC Merced and UC Water. What we're doing, or what the researchers that I work with have done, is they've developed systems, and imagine this. Imagine if every watershed in the Sierra had stream gauge monitors, soil moisture monitors, evapotranspiration monitors. Right now, because the forests are overgrown, they're actually using a heck of a lot more water than they did in the past. 100 years ago, there were 50% less trees. And so, and the elevation where these trees grow is actually having a significant impact on water supply that actually makes it across the meadows and down the streams and down the hill. And these snow monitors, and then this is a flux tower. With all this information, what you get is something called water balance. So at any moment, it's a real-time system, and at any moment, it can tell you how much water is in the system and how much water is coming out of the system. So imagine, as water managers, if every watershed in California was instrumented in a way that got you accurate information, early information, and allowed the decision makers downhill to go, hey, we think we're gonna have an excess of X acre-feet of water. That's which groundwater basin needs it, you know. But it's gonna require the collaboration of land managers, water managers, and water users. And that's where, when you start looking at this and think about the water, Transparent Water Data Act, and the other things that I mentioned, the other thing is that watersheds as infrastructure, that actually will pay for forest management to improve forest health, to increase both water capture and water quality. Because when these forests burn catastrophically, like we have been seeing, it destroys the soils, and for the first season, those devastating fires actually create a concrete-like surface, and water just runs off the top, and what it brings down are all those nasty chemicals and minerals into the reservoirs, and makes it even more expensive to treat the water. So we've got a ton of projects that we're gonna have to do and coordinate, and I'm gonna stop there. But I personally, I'm actually hopeful that the science, the agencies, and the community working together can figure out how we were able to make the decisions, because we're gonna be experiencing a world that nobody before us has experienced. It's, yeah, anyway.
So, are these water monitoring technologies already in effect right now, or is that what is the vision?
We actually have them in a couple of basins. We have them in the Feather River, and so here's a really good example. We had just put them in, and if we had been really operating those things to be able to inform decision makers, we could have avoided the Oroville floods. It's that kind of stuff.
Do you have tours for like students, community?
Oh yeah, we have something called the Critical Zone Observatory, which is up by Shaver Lake. You know where that is? We could
Wow, too. Maybe that's one of the trips for wow.
Retreat.
I have one question. Matter of fact, some of the things we've been attending over there in the Turlock Irrigation District is that I think that everybody needs to kind of, come together and agree. And that was the message that was sent there, but I still think that they're still not there yet.
Oh no, you're right. Something that I've been working on, on my own, but actually my boss just got a big grant to pursue this, and it is basically it's multi-benefits efforts that really identify a region, and you look at where do the investments have to go, who makes the investments, and then who gets the benefits. But it's everything. It's carbon, it's water, it's avoided fire costs, it's all these things. And so we really, and I was just talking with the senator about having her come to campus to look at that, and it'd be great to get some of you there to have inputs into the kinds of things that we need to be considered. Because when you hear multi-benefits programs, usually what people are talking about is water, or just one resource in the system, and there's sort of incidental benefits for other things. But I think we're at a point where we actually have to be very intentional about understanding multi-benefits programs. That's one thing. And then the other that I've been working on is there's something called the California Landscape Scale Network. And I helped put one together in Marin, where we actually got 4 land management agencies to create a memorandum of understanding so that we're managing an entire watershed together. And what that has done is it's created efficiencies in terms of we don't need as many bulldozers. We don't need to be duplicating equipment. We share people, we share resources, and most importantly, we are actually all investing together in the science and the work that has to be done for a region. And so you see what I'm saying? I think that, anyway, So I think that there are things that are emerging, and those are really tough to do. But we're actually going to have a 2-day, actually a 3-day retreat. There's 55 people that are going to be there in mid-November, early November, and part of it is we're going to be looking at some test cases in the Southern Sierra where we can get, if you can imagine this, a string of pearls of single agencies, not a bunch of people, and see how we can work, what people need to consider, working with our resource conservation district managers and sort of all the people, because there's already individuals and organizations that are working cross-boundary, and the interesting thing about that is that every region has its own culture. So it's not like it's going to be, it's not like we're talking about an agency that's going to come in and put a blanket and say, you must do it like this. It really is a thoughtful way of getting community engagement, and I think about the work that Self-Help Enterprises is doing, the work that you have been doing, and imagine those models extended upstream, you know, and just creating that understanding. I know I'm being sort of like hopeful, but I think it's important that we try to do that.
Exactly. No, great.
Quintero, one last point. Observing that energy conservation is something that could happen with a lot of these practices, smart practices. Is there greenhouse gas monies available for these type of projects?
Yes, and I sort of paused because just day before yesterday I met with a couple of professors.
If not, I got a senator that could probably back us up.
No. Here's what I've asked. I'm putting together an advisory group of faculty at Merced, and what I want to do in the early spring is hold a symposium that shows what all the opportunities are based on research. And so, for example, she was telling me that if you can take biogas generated from wastewater treatment plants, it actually has like 75 times the value of natural gas. So you can get credits. You see what I'm saying? So there's all these things that every community needs. And I think we need to be looking, especially, I think about these foothill communities, which in a way are disadvantaged communities as well, because they're tiny communities that have wastewater and drinking water supply systems. They can't afford the modernization to keep them up to snuff. Right. So we have to figure out other economic frameworks that'll work for those areas. And part of that for me is also, and this, I'll finish with this, I think all Californians need to absolutely not only understand, but they have to invest in the places on which they depend. Everybody in California depends on these mountains. Everybody in California depends on these watersheds. And ultimately, everybody in California depends on the aquifers which end up on our tables. You know, and so I think there's a really important messaging challenge that we have, because quite frankly, we've been brought up with subsidies that haven't had us realize in a way the true cost of what we get.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
Amen to that. Now you know why he's the chairman of the California Water Commission. I told you guys. I told you this with a heavy-hitting lineup. Yeah. So we got closing remarks. I was told we got to get everybody out of here by 1 o'clock. So I'm going to ask Rodrigo Espinosa.
Yeah, hey, I think Ray wants to go first.
Ray wants to go
yes,
first?
Ray's first.
Hey, Ray, I mean, some of you got to speak that.
Keep track of the time. I got at least 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I think this was very educational. Being part of WELL and going to a number of areas just throughout the state of California, we learned a great deal. But today, I'm telling you, I never learned it all. And today, I just learned that much more, especially empowering just my perception of the importance of the energy-water nexus, right? I mean, that's huge. That's huge. And I think Mr. Quintero also said something really important in terms of how the different cultures or perceptions on water throughout the region, right? And I think that, for us, we're seeing these forums, Valos, like myself, Rodrigo, are doing these throughout the state, but I'm thinking, you know what? I think in our region, we need to break it up and have them in our different communities. I think that may be something of interest, and all the council members, mayors that are here today, let me know how I can help out. I'll take some Starbucks. But I think it's important because I think at the end of the day, we gotta have as many folks as possible, aware and conscious of this huge challenge that really the future of our species depends on. You know, I say it like, almost like laughing because, I mean, it's crazy that we're in this position, you know? And we gotta do something about it. But it's not gonna happen without really creating awareness within our communities to have a better understanding. So like that, we get rid of these extremes. And then we're closer within El Arroyo, that valley, to have a better understanding and really make something happen, right? Un aplauso because I know Senator Caballero's gonna help me with my issue in Huron. So thank you all for coming. I mean, I'm impressed. Hold on. And then I have the honor to also present my colleague and good friend, Rodrigo Espinosa, and paisano de Michoacán.
Before I present the gifts to our speakers, one quick thing, all the electeds, not taking away from the engineers, but I know a lot of the electeds that were here, please make sure that you guys, on the council, get appointed to the GSAs. It's very important because most of the GSAs are mostly made up of farmers. So we want to make sure that you guys are dealing with on those committees, on the GSAs, that not only farmers have, I'm a farmer, so I'm not taking away from farmers. Work together with farmers along because do you have a voice? Your constituents have a voice because they live in the city. So we have to pay a lot of bills. So make sure that stress that because I know some of especially the small cities, they usually are not represented in the GSA. So hey, make sure you go to the council, put on the agenda. One of the members, the elected members, be on the GSA. So. And now leading to thanking the speakers. If you can please come up and Well has a gift for you for your speaker.
Is there a prize for the people that drove from the furthest? We got Hollister here, man. They drove
Quick picture.
Group picture, all right.
Fresno.
Oh, yeah.
Are they gonna stay around?
Right now?
Okay,
One more thing, wait, we have more announcements.
Yeah, one more thing before we close, and that is, don't forget to fill this out, okay? It's the evaluation of what we did today, okay? And secondly, just to remind you about the conference that's happening in San Jose. It's on their website, you can download it.
And last thing, please don't forget to sign in. If you forgot to sign on the way in, there's a sign-out sheet. Make sure we get a thing, everybody get that, okay? So
PowerPoints will be online on the website.
Okay, PowerPoint's online.
And we need to thank Brianne. You just did all the
Victor
work.
and Miguel Luna, yes sir. Founders, please, do you want to come in and take a picture with us?
Are we going to do it outside?
And our staff, Alma Marquez and Brianne, thank you very much. Thank all of you guys.
Ryan and Daniel for coming, the young council members from El Valle and representing El Futuro.
In the water district.
Hey, I thought you were the young council member.
Are these the forms?
Yes. Back. Yes, that's
I'm gonna take the 5-year report.